The story began inside a dungeon where several creatures were destroying everything around them, as if desperately searching for something or someone. That someone was a desperate young man running for his life, trying to understand how he had ended up in such a ridiculous situation. He could hardly believe it when he came face to face with a dragon. Still in shock, he fell off a cliff and was attacked by a giant squid, similar to a kraken, while still riding the dragon. After that, he nearly died in the claws of another creature, and surprisingly, he did not feel fear. Yet, not long ago, he had been just an ordinary man, unemployed and without purpose. Without understanding how it all happened, he began to wonder how he had ended up in that madness. In that moment of despair, a mysterious figure appeared and cut the creature in half, saving his life. The people around him asked if Gilroshan was all right, but he himself did not know how to answer. Despite the confusion, one thing was clear. He also wanted answers. He wanted to understand what that cruel fate was planning for him. Going back a bit in time, Gilroshan was in his room, isolated from the world like so many other reclusive young people. He spent his days playing online games, aimless and unmotivated. One day while playing, a message appeared in the chat, asking if anyone would like a second chance at life. He laughed at the idea and thought only a miserable person would fall for such an offer. To him, reality was not a game, and second chances did not exist. Even so, he imagined how good it would be if he could start over. Maybe he would change many things in his life. He remembered growing up in an orphanage, without peace or affection. After leaving, he started working in a factory, and now, at 30 years old, he survived with part-time jobs while trying to study for public service exams. His only break, the only moment of joy in his tiring routine, was that game he loved so much, The World Abandoned by God. He had been playing that MMORPG for over 10 years and was considered a veteran, someone who knew all the secrets and strategies of the game. At 30 years old, all he had was that rented room in the game. He thought that if he were as good at dealing with life as he was with that virtual world, his reality would be completely different. At that moment, the same person from the chat appeared again with a new message, saying that if he really was willing to accept that second chance, all he had to do was follow. Gilroshan thought that guy must have too much free time, but admitted to himself that he also wanted a second chance, even if it was as difficult as they said. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but in the end, he replied to the message. As soon as he did, a new voice sounded in his headphones. Someone said that all he had to do was survive. Then something unbelievable happened. He was literally sucked into the computer. Confused and scared, he tried to understand where he was. He felt something on his face until someone removed a bag from his head. He was now surrounded by a group of kidnappers who seemed to be preparing for an execution. Among them, they called a boy Gilroshan Euro de Volt, the third prince of the magic empire of Volt. One of the kidnappers ordered them to remove the prince's gag and told him to lift his head and look him in the eye. Gilroshan recognized those words. That was exactly the same dialogue from a very specific scene in the game he knew so well. The assassin then confirmed that it was the right face. He was convinced it was the prince. In Gilroshan's mind, everything made sense. That was clearly part of the game. He remembered that scene perfectly. It was the third major event in the main storyline, the assassination of the prince. It felt like a dream. And to him, that made sense since it was not the first time he had dreamed about something related to the game. But something was off. Why were they calling him Prince? Could it be some kind of elaborate prank? The doubt consumed him until the kidnapper announced that he would be executed in the name of the Republic and that his head would be sent back to the king. Gilroshan tried to argue, saying there must be some misunderstanding. However, the man had already drawn his sword and pressed it against his neck. Just that gesture made the blood run. The kidnapper warned him not to try anything, because even though he was a despicable prince, he still carried imperial blood, and when the emperor saw his son's decapitated body, he certainly would not let it go unpunished. That was when Gilroshan understood the truth. This was no dream or prank, it was real, and apparently he had been transported into the body of a useless character, himself. In the game, Gilroshan was known as the Pig Prince, a lazy, weird, unimportant noble, with almost no dialogue. He was a background NPC, a disposable character whose death happened early in the story. Now, he was living through the exact moment of that character's death in the game. But he realized something important. Since he was just an NPC, he was not bound by a protagonist's choices. Maybe he could still do something. Then the kidnapper approached again and asked if he had any last words. The execution was about to happen. Gilroshan tried to defend himself, saying he had no idea what was going on and that he was not the third prince. However, the assassin was not convinced. To him, Gilroshan's red, glowing eyes already made it clear which family he came from, which was proof enough of his identity. In the the assassin's view, there was no escape for the one he believed to be the third prince. Meanwhile, Gil Roshan's consciousness, newly arrived in that body, remained confused and indignant, wondering if fate had really put him into such a useless character. It had to be a terrible joke. The assassin, in turn, said it was nothing personal and promised to make it quick and painless. He said goodbye to the prince and prepared to kill him. However, before the blow landed, Gil Roshan noticed that he felt no pain at all. When he looked around, he saw that everything was frozen, even the assassin. Then a system notification appeared informing that the game had begun. The player had selected the character from the Vault Empire named Gil Roshan. It was then explained that in the world abandoned by God, there was a secret randomization rule, known only to a few experienced players. Every initial choice came with 3 cards, and at least one of them was for close combat, ensuring a minimally reliable start. The average rating of initial cards was usually B. Gil Roshan, wishing for just one chance to defend himself, hoped for at least an A-rank card, or at least a decent tank. He was not asking for anything extraordinary, but to his disappointment, the first card he received was Fate, a gladiator slave, rank F. He was in disbelief and thought it was a complete disappointment. When he opened the second, it was even worse, a third-rate stage actor, rank D. He could hardly believe he was getting nothing but useless cards. Still, he remembered that the average should be B. Since he had already received an F and a D, the last one had to be something very good. He began trembling with anticipation, hoping for an S-rank card. When he opened the third card, he was surprised by a burst of light that blinded him. Before him appeared an impressive rank 10 card, which was even above rank S. It was the Archmage card. Gil Roshan was stunned. It was simply unbelievable. The X rank was extremely rare, and he had never gotten one at the start of a game. The Archmage was the highest long-range DPS in the entire game. He began to wonder how such a powerful card could have appeared so early. He thought maybe it was because he was not a playable character, but an NPC, and maybe, because of that, the normal rules did not apply. The body he now inhabited belonged to an NPC named Gil Roshan, nicknamed Pig Prince. Unlike customized, player-created characters, he had a past, a lineage, and importance in the story. The Imperial family of Vault, for example, was known for producing incredibly talented mages. For this reason, the appearance of the Archmage card made some sense. Even so, Gil Roshan knew he could not get carried away by excitement. At that moment, the most important thing was to choose a card that could save him from imminent death. The Archmage card, as powerful as it was, would not help with that. Despite having bonus attributes, unique skills, and exclusive equipment, the only thing he could use immediately were the card's 3 skills. Among those skills, there was a defensive one called Field Domination, but it only worked with magical or enchanted weapons. Also, all magical abilities required time to gather mana and cast the spell. If he had been an inexperienced player, Gil Roshan probably would have picked the Archmage card and died without even having time to react. But he knew that in that world, there were no second chances. If he died there, he would die for real. Someone had brought him into that world and placed him in the body of a weak NPC exactly at the scene where he was meant to be killed. Receiving a powerful card at that moment almost felt like a cruel joke. However, he did not want to die, so he chose the Slave Warrior card, even though it was rank F. The idea that he would one day reject an X-rank card to choose an F-rank one was almost absurd, but it was necessary. He said goodbye to the Archmage card, promising that he would find it again someday. As soon as he chose the Slave Warrior card, it was automatically equipped, and Gil Roshan received the 3 exclusive skills of the class. He was frustrated to see that there were only 3 skills and thought his luck was already terrible. In games, when you started with a bad character, it was easy to reset and try again. But in this case, there was no such option. The body he now inhabited in the game's original story would die from blood loss. Now, it was he who lived there and had to find a way to survive. When he asked himself how to use the skill, the system was already rebooting the match. At that moment, he was struck by the assassin's sword. The mission commander, seeing that the operation had been successful, praised the team and ordered a quick return via the planned route through the mountain pass. However, one of the assassins reported that the prince was still alive. The commander was surprised and asked how that was possible, since the order was to cut off his head. Yet Gil Roshan was still alive. He was trembling, sweating cold, and had possibly wet himself in fear. But despite everything, he was still breathing. Gil Roshan thought it was a good thing he had learned to use the ability naturally, because if he had not, he would probably already be headless. Even so, he found the situation awful. The ability he used had a cooldown of 24 hours, meaning he would not be able to use it again anytime soon. The 3 skills of the Slave Warrior card were called Preference for Masochism, Preference for Sadism, and Preference for Restraint. The first, Preference for Masochism, activated when the the user suffered non-lethal damage. In that case, no further damage would be taken for a short time, and his physical and mental regeneration would increase drastically. This skill had a cooldown of 15 minutes. The second, Preference for Sadism, made the user perform a very powerful offensive move that caused severe bleeding in the enemy, but also dealt damage to the user's own body. It also had a 15-minute cooldown. The third, Preference for Restraint, was the reason why he chose this card instead of the Archmages. When the user was tied up or immobilized, this skill allowed him to ignore one instance of fatal damage. This card was well known among players who enjoyed alternative playstyles. At first glance, the skills seemed useful, but they all came with drawbacks. The main problem was that there was never a truly appropriate moment to use them efficiently. Because of this, despite its potential, the card was rated F rank. Meanwhile, the commander of the assassins was still trying to understand what had happened. He asked how it was possible that the prince's head was still attached. Gilroshan, still trembling, knew that if he were struck again, there would be no way to save himself. He needed to get out of that situation immediately. The commander said he did not know what Gilroshan had done, but that it would not save him. Then one of the assassins commented that it was an absurd display of boldness. All the assassins turned at the same time, staring at Gilroshan as if they could see into his soul. The commander asked if he had completely lost his mind. At that moment, Gilroshan decided to take a risk. He called the commander by his full name, Bamilo Demark. The man froze and asked how the hell he knew his name. But Gilroshan stood up and, assuming an arrogant posture, said that he was an insolent fool for not recognizing his own master just because he was in a useless body. He declared that it was him, the true master, the god of vengeance, Aeolum. The declaration shocked everyone, but Gilroshan knew exactly who he was dealing with. Those men were priests of vengeance, members of the High Church of Aeolum, all followers of the god of vengeance. Ironically, despite being assassins, they also served one of the game's three main factions, which was linked to the Revolutionary Army. They sought to overthrow the empire, and naturally, kidnapping the third prince was part of the plan. To get out of that situation alive, Gilroshan would have to play a role that required more talent than that of a mere actor. He would have to literally give his life to that performance, because his survival depended on it. Continuing the ruse, Gilroshan declared that he was the one who had descended into that body and ordered them to release him immediately. The commander, confused, asked if he really was the vessel of Aeolum. Gilroshan, without hesitation, asked how he dared to point at the body he now inhabited and even raise a hand against his own god. Demark, stunned, could not react. Even so, Gilroshan thought that maybe he had overdone it a little, but decided he could not waver. He could not hesitate. He needed to act exactly as Aeolum would. The game world was known for having 12 gods. Although most were meddlesome, all of them enjoyed interfering in the affairs of mortals. Because of this, major and minor incidents caused by divine intervention happened all the time. When the game was released, many players thought Aeolum was just another evil god with a weird name. However, among all 12, he was the one who thrived the most on war, misery, and death. He fed on conflict, discord, and chaos. That was why he frequently appeared to his followers. At that moment, this was playing in Gilroshan's favor. Demark then said he understood, but wanted to know why the god had not given a sign of faith to his followers. Gilroshan, staying in character, replied that if he needed a sign of faith, he would have it. He said that the previous week, the commander had offered a golden statue on his altar, but revealed that it was not solid gold, only gold-plated. Surprised, Demark asked how he knew that. Gilroshan, still pretending to be Aeolum, asked if they really thought he would not notice the deceit. He demanded to be released immediately. The assassins rushed to untie the ropes that bound him. Observing their reaction, Gilroshan concluded that most of them seemed to believe his performance up to that point. Everything was going as expected. After all, no one would ever imagine that the harmless and incompetent third prince could act so convincingly. Despite this, Bamilo Demark still seemed suspicious. He was not just anyone. He was the high priest of the High Church of Aeolum, leader of the Priests of Vengeance, and a cold-tempered man. In the Revolutionary Army, he was known as the orchestrator of the prince's assassination. Even so, Bamilo bowed, asking forgiveness for not recognizing him. But Gilroshan knew that was just a way to buy time. The priest was still undecided. He needed to keep a close eye on that man. Gilroshan then demanded to know what they were waiting for, because they should all be kneeling before him. The assassins, frightened, begged forgiveness from the great god of vengeance. Aeolum and Bamilo also apologized for not honoring the divine presence. Still, Bamilo questioned why the god had descended personally instead of sending an oracle. Gilroshan thought that bastard really did not trust him, and worse, a white-haired man farther in the back made him particularly uneasy. He felt he needed some kind of insurance in that situation. He then declared with conviction conviction that the third prince, Gil-Roshan, would be personally chosen as Aolim's apostle, and no one could touch him. Upon hearing this, Bamilo was confused and asked what that meant. His expression was understandable. That divine decision completely changed their plans. The high-value target they had captured with such effort was now untouchable. Gil-Roshan stated that, in the future, the Prince of the Empire would join the Revolutionary Army. Bamilo, after some thought, accepted the order. He said they would spare the prince's body and follow the divine will. But Gil-Roshan knew that once they returned, the priests would try to verify the truth with the high priest. And if they discovered the ruse, they would come back to kill him. Even pretending to accept it, Bamilo still seemed suspicious. He knew he could kill Gil-Roshan at any moment. Furthermore, Gil-Roshan suspected that there was a traitor within the group. There was no chance someone of imperial lineage would be left to die like that by accident. If they were trying to execute him, it meant both sides. The Empire and the revolutionaries were part of the conspiracy. Gil-Roshan reflected that many people wanted him dead. The Empire was like a prison to him, so he stated that everything that had happened should be kept secret from the commander. The third prince would not return to the imperial palace. That body had to be taken to Arax, where it would become the apostle. Everyone would have to prepare for that. The commander asked why, but Gil-Roshan only replied that Bamilo must protect that child at all costs on the way to Arax. She had to arrive alive. It was explained that Arax was the largest city in the west and the capital of the Revolutionary Army, an enemy territory of the Empire. But based on what he knew about the game's future events, Gil-Roshan would be safer in Arax than anywhere else. The more he learned, the greater his chances of acquiring powerful cards. He thought leaving behind the Archmage's card had been worth it. There were still many other ways to use the system mechanics to his advantage. Gil-Roshan then asked why everyone was still standing around. It was time to move on. He thought to himself that he would turn that useless character into a legendary one. To do that, he would need to conquer everything within his reach. Later, when the group set up camp along the road, several members began preparing food for Gil-Roshan. They grilled meat, offered fruits, and served well-prepared dishes. He was no longer the incarnated god of vengeance. Supposedly, he had only faked a temporary possession to protect that child and had promised a reward to anyone who kept the child alive. Because of that, everyone started flattering him, treating the prince as a guest of honor. Gil-Roshan, confused by the exaggerated treatment, said he was trying to lose weight and didn't want to eat that much, but the others insisted he at least try a small piece. He was surrounded by admiring eyes filled with awe. These were the same assassins who had come to kill him, but now they looked like children adoring a hero. Almost laughing, he asked them to stop, saying he really wanted to eat but needed to lose weight. While Gil-Roshan tried to resist, someone commented that one bite wouldn't hurt and asked what he had to lose. He reflected that losing weight was good, but giving into temptation was much worse. At that moment, the commander appeared and asked what everyone was doing since no one was on watch. Annoyed, he ordered everyone to get up and get back to work. The commander then told Gil-Roshan not to think so badly of the others. Gil-Roshan, who was the prince, replied that he was aware of the situation and wasn't offended. The commander pretended he would give Gil-Roshan a snack, but then said he wouldn't give anything since Gil-Roshan was trying to slim down. The prince remarked that he was really mean. Bamilo observed that the prince had lost a lot of weight and looked completely different. It was impressive to think he had slimmed down that much in just 4 days. Gil-Roshan said he also hadn't expected to lose weight so quickly, even though he hadn't eaten anything during that time. It was truly surprising. Bamilo said he had met all kinds of people during his training as an assassin of the Church of Vengeance, but had never seen anyone as determined as the prince. At first, he thought Gil-Roshan was useless. Gil-Roshan, in turn, remembered that the commander was shocked when he learned about his situation, and that even looking with his own eyes, he could see that his body was in terrible condition. Right after they set off, he could barely run for long. His body was too weak and tired easily. Walking was already a challenge. When checking the attributes of the character he now inhabited, Gil-Roshan found out he was level 0, with 35 strength, 68 intelligence, 61 charisma, and only 3 points left to allocate. The worst part, however, was his energy stat. He had only 9 points of stamina. He was shocked and wondered if it was normal to have only a single-digit stamina. An average NPC usually had around 200 total attribute points, but he had only 173. Having just 9 stamina meant his body was practically a corpse. Gil-Roshan decided he needed to increase his stamina at any cost, and thought he could use the process to continue losing weight. The commander told Gil-Roshan that he shouldn't be that tired since they had just started. One of the assassins said it was worrying, because if Gil Roshan kept that pace, he would put everyone in danger. They might even need to use a recovery potion on him. But Gil Roshan didn't want to accept help. As a follower of the Church of Vengeance, he couldn't rely on others and didn't want to be a burden to the group, so he used his special ability. He slammed his head against the ground, and even with his face bloody, said he didn't need a potion and would keep going like that. He activated an ability called Preference for Masochism, which lasted 30 seconds and boosted his physical regeneration. With that, he fully recovered his stamina. Despite the pain, there was one advantage. Low stats meant it was easier to level up. For 4 days, Gil Roshan repeatedly slammed his head against trees and rocks. To him, that was better than being dead weight. The assassins began to recognize him as someone extremely persistent. With this brutal training, his stamina increased from 9 to 37 points. It was still low, but it was just the beginning of a long journey. The commander announced that they would reach the teleport gate the next day and would return to Arax using the same portal. The problem was that the group had been sent to kill Gil Roshan, so they couldn't just bring him back alive. No one had expected him to become a follower of Lord Aeolum. Gil Roshan said he knew there was someone infiltrated working from within and asked Bamilo to be honest with him. He was sure there was a traitor. Bamilo agreed and said that since he also hadn't returned to the Empire, the informant would probably think the plan had failed. They knew who was involved, so predicting the departure point would be easy. Because of that, they would probably set up an ambush. Using that portal again was practically impossible. Even so, they were an elite force of the Revolutionary Army. While they could face danger, things would get much more complicated if they were attacked from both the front and the rear. Gil Roshan stated that was why they had to hurry. The commander replied that beyond that, he was surprised that Gil Roshan already knew about a traitor inside the Empire. He asked directly if Gil Roshan knew who the person was. Gil Roshan answered that he believed it was the Prime Minister, Viscount Jarek Moss. The commander wanted to know if he had any specific reason to think that. Gil Roshan hadn't expected the question, but realized the commander wasn't being sarcastic, only genuinely curious. He knew he had to prove his worth if he wanted to continue using that body as a loyal follower of the Church of Vengeance. Jarek Moss was not an irrelevant character. He appeared multiple times in the story and held some importance. Gil Roshan explained that the Prime Minister was born in the Empire, but had tribal blood. Recently, the Empire and the tribe had been at war over territorial control, and the tribe was closely aligned with the Revolutionary Army. Additionally, the Viscount's daughter had married a native nobleman who lived near the border. It was clear that the Empire and the Revolutionary Army were in conflict, and that region was facing numerous difficulties. Being a noble on that border meant only two things. Either they hated the Revolutionary Army, or they were secretly collaborating with it. Viscount Jarek had married off his own daughter to a border noble to establish a direct line of contact with the Revolutionary Army. But that was not all. This connection had been made through the High Church of Aeolum, and his son-in-law was likely a follower of Aeolum, or even a priest of the faith. For Gil Roshan, knowing these details showed how valuable it was to understand the game's story. The commander, surprised, said he did not expect the prince to have such a deep understanding of the situation. Gil Roshan, on the other hand, felt that he did not even need to explain so much. It was clear that everyone only looked at his appearance and failed to see what was truly going on. He knew that the main mission was to escape that place. The way back was compromised. The route was blocked. According to the game's original story, the third prince Gil Roshan should have died 4 days ago. His mere survival had completely altered the course of the narrative. With the changes in events, Prime Minister Jarek would certainly play his strongest cards. The closest army to Kirtian, the capital and center of the mountain range, was the Special Forces Knights. The commander of that group was none other than Marquis Elron Reit, and Gil Roshan knew just how dangerous that name was. The commander emphasized that, in any case, they needed to get as far away as possible to avoid pursuit. However, if they stopped to rest, they might end up surrounded. Gairon Chan stated that stopping would be a mistake. If they did that, they would never reach the portal in time. The commander then asked what they should do. It was evident they needed a new exit, a path that did not exist in the original game. As the commander was about to say something, another assassin approached. He asked if they really intended to wait until the enemies arrived. He also asked if the prince thought it was wise to just stand around waiting for the guards. Gil Roshan recognized that provocative tone. He wondered who that guy was and thought he might be the same bastard who had bothered him days earlier. The white-haired assassin stepped forward and silently revealed that he knew the truth. Without further delay, he drew his sword. The prince understood that the conversation had begun, so he decided to use the situation situation to get more information. The assassin demanded answers, growing increasingly impatient, gripping his blade tightly. Gil Roshan, however, simply chuckled and sarcastically asked who he thought he was. He said he didn't even know his identity, so why should he respond? He also provoked the assassin, asking if he really thought the commander would just stand by and watch someone attack the prince, who was supposed to be protected at all costs. Gil Roshan then revealed two things. The first was that he had no intention of returning to the palace. If that were his plan, he would have simply run away to buy time and never gotten involved with the priests of vengeance. The second was that, yes, he really was waiting for his bodyguards. Even so, he felt he did not need to explain anything to someone as despicable as that man. The assassin grew angry at the insult. He asked what Gil Roshan meant by lowly people, and without hesitation, grabbed the prince by the collar. At that moment, Gil Roshan smelled something strange on him, something that resembled a floral perfume. It was a familiar scent. Before the situation got out of hand, the commander stepped in and separated them, saying that was enough. He then introduced the assassin. His name was Irgal, and although he was not part of the church, he was a comrade of the revolution. Gil Roshan thought that was exactly what he suspected. The man was a mercenary. The game Abandoned by God explained that the player's character was not affiliated with any fixed group. This was to guarantee freedom of choice. The player could wander the world as a mercenary, and Gil Roshan had never heard of anyone named Irgal. It was almost certain that he was a player, just like Gil Roshan from the real world. Irgal demanded that the prince explain why he was so determined to wait for the Empire's guards, and then it was revealed who those guards were. The bear and Oriole were known as the Prince Gil Roshan's shadows. In addition to them, there was the 6th level knight Karl Silion, and Gil Roshan's magical mentor, the 7th level witch Tirvayan Sui. They were powerful figures. Irgal, impatient, told the commander that they didn't have time to wait. He insisted they needed to kill the prince immediately. Gil Roshan, however, responded. He said that the commander of the Special Forces Knights was Marquis Elron Reit, and asked if anyone there had heard of him. The commander replied that of course he knew. It was impossible not to know one of the 3 great swordmasters of the Empire, but he wanted to know why the prince was bringing up his name now. Gil Roshan was direct. He asked if they thought they could defeat that man. It was a simple question, yes or no. If they continued like this, they would all die at Elrond's hands. If Irgal wanted to die, he could go alone. It was then explained that Marquis Elron Reit had reached the 9-star realm of the sword. Even by Abandoned by God's player standards, he was one of the strongest NPCs in the game. His level was around 90. Gil Roshan warned that if anyone wanted to vanish without a trace, they only had to try facing him. Irgal, surprised, asked if that powerful man from the Empire would really come after them. Gil Roshan confirmed that he was telling the truth. They were truly walking toward death. To his surprise, Irgal did not argue. He thought the man would talk back, disagree, cause problems, but apparently Irgal was not completely stupid. The commander then asked what they would do if Elron Reit and his knights were truly blocking the gate. Even if Karl Silion showed up, they still would not win. Gil Roshan said there was a way. If they listened to his plan, they could pass through the portal and enter Arax safely, without any more trouble. But first, he needed everyone to make 2 promises. The first condition was to keep secret everything he would reveal from that moment on. They had to swear in the name of Aeolum. The commander agreed, but to everyone's surprise, he sealed the deal with a pinky promise with the prince. The second promise was even simpler. As soon as they arrived in Arax, they needed to find an item for him. Nothing special, just a pair of ordinary glasses that could easily be bought in the city. The commander thought the request was strange, but agreed, saying it would be easy. Then the prince began to explain. The man they called Bear, Karl Silion, was also known as the Knight of Dawn. He was one of the high-ranking knights of the Empire. After the monarchy collapsed, he fled to the 5 northern kingdoms, where he became the commander of the Sky Knights. But in truth, his full name was Karl Reit. He was the illegitimate son of Elrond. Almost no one knew that, not even Karl Silion himself. Even so, Gil Roshan suspected that Irgal had already found out. If he was a real person, just like the player who had taken over Gil Roshan's body, he should have noticed something was wrong, since the prince, who was supposed to be dead, was still alive. The question was, how much did Irgal know about the game? Before they could continue, a knight approached. It was Karl Silion, and with him came his mentor, Tirvayan Sui. As soon as they arrived, Karl shouted, asking how they dared to kidnap the prince. He said everyone should surrender immediately and release Gil Roshan. The assassins grew tense, knowing they had in fact kidnapped the prince. But now he was following them by his own choice. Gil Roshan hurried over to where Karl's was. He had left clues to lead them there, evidence deliberately scattered along the way, but he hadn't expected Karl's to arrive so quickly. If Tirvayan Sui decided to intervene, the priests would stop holding back. They would start a full-on battle. That was exactly what he wanted to avoid. But Sui was already preparing her magic. She asked where her disciple was and threatened to turn everyone to ashes if they didn't speak immediately. That was when Gil Roshan appeared, calling out to his master. Upon seeing him, Sui stopped her spell instantly. Both she and Carl Cillian were confused. They asked if it was really him. Carl's questioned what the assassins had done to the prince and why he was so thin. He wanted to know what kind of sorcery had been used. The assassin said they hadn't done anything. Roshan explained that yes, he had been kidnapped, but not anymore. It was as simple as that. Sui, shaken, asked what he meant. She said she had gone through hell to find him, and now he said that, as if it meant nothing. Frustrated, she threatened to cast a fireball that would kill everyone, including him. Roshan thought that between master and disciple, there should be a close bond, but even as a prince, he wasn't respected. It was rather depressing. Sui asked if he really didn't intend to return to the Empire with them. That wasn't what she had taught him. Roshan was surprised at how much a noble like her could swear. He had always thought she was a saint. Then it was explained who she truly was. Tirvain Sue, also known as the Crimson Shadow, was the pride of the Volt Magic Empire, raised by the Tower of Five Colors. There were rumors she was over 200 years old, yet she kept her youth by bathing in the blood of creatures. In truth, she was only 19. It was her soul that was over 200 years old. She was part of a lineage of witches who passed down their legacy to their successors. When the power was transferred, the name Tirvain Sui, part of the memories, and even the appearance were passed along to maintain fear and mystery around that figure. Carl Cillian asked her to calm down. He said the prince must have a good reason, so they should listen to him before acting. Hearing that, Sui relaxed. When Carl's got closer, Roshan realized she was weak when it came to handsome men. Then the prince explained to both of them that he would go to Arax with the assassins. Sui said he had truly lost his mind. Carl's reminded him that Arax was enemy territory, the main base of the Revolutionary Army, which made him a direct enemy of the Empire. Roshan said he knew that, and that was exactly why he was going. The path he had chosen wasn't a continuation of his past. It was something new. He knew it was hard for everyone to understand, but it was his own decision. It was the only path he believed could lead to survival. It was the destiny he had chosen. That's why he asked Carl Cillian to stop chasing him. That was a direct order from the prince. He also asked for his master's forgiveness. He knew she might think he had strayed from her teachings, but he hadn't abandoned magic. It just wasn't the right time. One day, he would definitely make the five-colored lights shine again. Sui wondered if that boy really hadn't given up, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw a determination she had never noticed before. It was something real, different from anything she had known in that man. Now, he said he would make her magic shine, and it was explained that true magic always shines pure and intensely, like the light of five colors. That was an old saying, passed down through generations since the foundation of the Tower of Five Colors, but most current mages probably didn't even know it. Sui was surprised to see that Roshan did. She had thought that scoundrel didn't even like magic, since he pretended to despise it in front of others due to his lack of talent. But secretly, he clung to it tightly. He had just been pretending to be an idiot while living at the palace, and his act had been perfect for surviving there. Sui blamed herself for not realizing that sooner. After all, she was his master. While she reflected, Roshan said he hoped both Carl's and she would accompany him to Arax. Sui accepted without hesitation, which even surprised the prince. She explained that, having been demoted to the role of his master, it was her duty to believe in her disciple. And maybe, since he was at least a prince by name, he could do something truly worthwhile. To Sui, Roshan finally seemed to know the path he should follow. The only problem was Carl's, known for being a strict follower of the rules. He was the typical straight-laced type, and his only mission was to bring the prince back to the palace safely. As he listened to everything, Carl's began to tremble. Sui thought that even if the words came from his own lord, he wouldn't obey. She imagined he would say something like, "Forgive me, but I must take you back." But to everyone's surprise, that was not what happened. Carl's began to cry. He was deeply moved by the prince's words. He then knelt before Roshan and declared that he had always believed the prince would find a great cause. He swore to follow his will and said that if anyone dared to stand in his way, he would use his sword to defeat them. Not even Sui expected that, nor did Roshan himself. With that, Carl's and Sui joined the prince's group. Meanwhile, in a distant place, Elrond was visibly frustrated. He complained that they were taking too long and there was no news about the hunt. According to the laws of the Empire, his unfortunate bastard son Carl's should have become a slave, but with great effort, Elrond had managed to hide his status. He arranged for him to be raised by the Cillian family, and ended up with the misfortune of having him become the useless companion of the third Prince Roshan, a complete scoundrel who only caused trouble. Now Gilroshan had been kidnapped, and Elrond knew that the more time Karls spent at his side, the worse his reputation became. That made him furious. He thought Karls was one of the Empire's most promising talents, but Gilroshan was dragging him down. Even though he had come out unscathed from the kidnapping incident, as long as he remained under that wretched prince's command, Elrond had no idea what might happen to his son. If they used the situation to eliminate the third prince, they could transfer Karls to a much more prestigious division. Elrond then asked his subordinate whether they were still tracking the prince and if there was any chance they had already located him. The messenger replied that even though they had a 7th level witch like Sui, her specialty was poison magic, not tracking, so it was unlikely they had found the prince already. Elrond smiled and said the heavens were on his side, though the messenger didn't quite understand what he meant. Elrond then explained that the mission was to intercept the kidnappers' escape route and eliminate them. Even if they had a hostage, no negotiation was to take place. The only priority was to destroy the enemy. He gave orders for all his knights to begin the mission. He thought that with this, the Special Forces soldiers wouldn't have time to worry about the third prince's safety. They would be focused only on eliminating the kidnappers. Later, Gilroshan was deep in thought when Karls approached, asking what he was thinking about. He also asked about the sword in front of him. Gilroshan replied that he needed something to protect himself, and Karls commented that he had lost a lot of weight and now actually looked like a real person. The prince said that after riding through those mountains like a madman, it was a miracle he was still alive. Karls said that even so, the prince had survived, and that he himself still didn't know what would have happened if something had gone wrong along the way. Gilroshan then thought that, in the original plot, he and Karls were distant relatives who had grown up together from a young age, and that made sense. Even so, he was not the original Gilroshan, but he was glad to see Karls. That boy, after all, was none other than the leader of the attack, Karls Reit. Gilroshan looked at Karls with respect. He was a talented tank, known in the game as worthy of the brilliant title, Knight of Dawn. If the player had Karls on their side and developed him properly, a positive ending was almost guaranteed. Still, seeing him there, alive, right in front of him in the flesh, caused a strange feeling. It was like meeting an old classmate with whom you once had a strong connection. At that moment, Sui was also waking up. Gilroshan thought of her as someone more difficult to get close to. Maybe that was why he hadn't used her as much in the game as he had used Karls. Or maybe it was because of the feelings he carried now, because there was something odd about her. And Sui, as always, showed up teasing, saying she had slept well beside Karls, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For Gilroshan, it was good to see her again, but also painful, like standing before someone to whom he owed something. Karls commented that he looked thinner but full of energy, like in the old days when they were together at the Palace of Boys. That palace was a kind of school where the sons of high-ranking nobles were educated. Karls recalled that at the time, Gilroshan was very smart. All the court ladies admired him, and even the king valued him. Gilroshan then wondered what the third prince had been like when he was younger. Since that had never been mentioned in the game, Karls asked what would have happened if the Empire of Valor had never made magic a basic knowledge for everyone. If it hadn't, things would have turned out very differently, even for Gilroshan. He thought that made a lot of sense. After all, he was a prince of a magical empire, but with no talent for magic. He had always carried heavy expectations on his shoulders. All the love he received when he was young disappeared, along with the people who expected too much from him. Maybe that was true, but that was only the past. Gilroshan told Karls that there was no use lamenting what was left behind. It didn't matter what kind of child he had been. No one remembered the third prince anymore, except Karls himself. That was why they should focus on the present. He asked what Karls thought about that, and Karls replied that it sounded like a great idea. He said that, coming from His Highness, it sounded even better. Gilroshan then said not to worry. He felt more confident than ever. Even if he was now seen as a failed character, he believed he could face the god-abandoned world. He didn't need magical talent. Instead of being an X-rank archmage, he could be an F-rank gladiator slave, but he would have a new opportunity in the future. He asked Karls to remember his words. He would return with the right to survive, and when he came back to the Empire, no one would dare to look down on him. He told Karls to raise his head, and Karls replied yes, that he would follow him loyally. When Sui returned, Gilroshan said it was time to talk about their future plans. He stated that he could not return to the palace, at least not yet. He explained that there weren't just 1 or 2 traitors inside, but many more. He asked if Karls knew Elrond Reit, and Karls replied yes, that he was a friend of his father and one of the 3 great swordmasters of the Empire, as well as the protector of the northern capital. Karls wanted to know if he was involved in some kind of betrayal, but Gilroshan explained that Elrond was not a traitor. He was, in fact, a loyal soldier. a martial artist of great honor. The problem was that Elrond was currently blocking the gate and would try to eliminate the assassins and take the prince back to the palace by force. Carls asked if Gil Roshan intended to convince him to cooperate, but the prince replied that it wouldn't work. Carls warned that if they did nothing, the group of assassins from the Church of Vengeance would be immediately wiped out, and they would all be dragged back to the palace with no way to resist. Gil Roshan didn't seem surprised. He said he expected that reaction, and revealed that he had another method, another plan. They were both curious to know what it was, and Gil Roshan answered that the plan was right there in front of them. He himself would defeat Reit and get past him because there was no other way. Carls was shocked and asked if he was out of his mind. He thought Gil Roshan had finally come to his senses, but now he seemed to be delirious. Sui also said she thought he wasn't doing well, and asked if it wouldn't be better to send him back home. While they shook their heads in disapproval, the prince thought that they were being very impatient. Gil Roshan asked if they didn't even intend to hear the plan first. Carls replied that the one pushing things too far was him. He wanted to know how they could possibly defeat a commander like Reit. Sui said it was great he had shown magical talent, but that would be the end of his life. Gil Roshan thought he didn't blame them for underestimating the prince. After all, the God-abandoned world wasn't a game that depended solely on leveling up and gaining stats, and his opponent was an NPC unaffected by fate cards. But if there was compatibility, traps, and mental effects used correctly, it was possible to defeat even a 9-star enemy while being only 6-star. Sui said she would like to hear the plan, and Gil Roshan explained. He intended to request a noble duel and during the fight, make the enemy's sword fly. If he could manage that, he would win. Carl said it was impossible. Completely impossible. It was then explained that the noble duel was a tradition of the Empire of Voltar. It was a distinct form of one-on-one combat, based on old aristocratic customs. As the name suggests, the duel rules were decided by both parties, and an observer was responsible for validating the agreement. Even the victory conditions were discussed. Gil Roshan said they just needed to set rules that made his victory possible, and Carls himself would be the observer. Carls then asked what kind of rule could possibly favor the prince in such a situation. If it was too strange, the commander wouldn't accept it. If it put the prince at risk, he wouldn't accept it either. Gil Roshan replied that he had already thought of everything. He would establish 3 rules. First, only swords could be used, with no techniques or aura. Second, whoever lost or dropped their sword would lose the duel. Third, no type of shield would be allowed. But then Carl stood up, clearly alarmed, saying those rules were even worse for the prince. The first condition, using only swords, might seem like an advantage for someone without magical talent, like Gil Roshan, but it actually wasn't. Commander Reit was extremely skilled at sword fighting. The second rule, that the one who dropped the sword would lose, clearly favored the stronger side, since the weaker fighter was more likely to lose grip. And finally, banning shields left the prince completely vulnerable. Carls firmly stated that he couldn't accept that. He said a duel was no joke, there were no guarantees, and if something happened during the fight, there would be no legal responsibility, even if one of the duelists was a prince. In a duel, anything could happen. He declared he would never accept those conditions, but Gil Roshan asked him not to worry. He assured him that his life would be safe. Carls, confused, asked how he could be so sure of that. That was when the prince decided to use an analogy. He told them to imagine that he was a swordmaster who had trained in fencing for 59 years. Then one day, a novice challenged him to a duel. The novice was a prince, and he, the veteran, was a marquis. He asked how Carls would act in such a situation. Carls replied that he would find it ridiculous. He would probably even laugh at the situation. It would be hard to take the duel seriously against such an inexperienced novice, and if the prince got hurt, the swordmaster himself would be the one harmed. So he would try only to disarm the novice. Gil Roshan explained that this was exactly the point. The no shields rule was created so that the marquis would be even more cautious. It was unlikely that he would attack with full strength, even if he hated him. Moreover, if Carls were the official observer of the duel, there would be no chance the marquis would go overboard in front of his dear son. Carls then asked why the prince thought the marquis hated him. Gil Roshan realized he had said too much and quickly tried to change the subject. He simply said that there were old stories between them and that Carls didn't need to know about it at that moment. In his thoughts, Gil Roshan apologized, as he couldn't reveal that Carl's own father wanted to kill him to ensure a better future for his son. Sui mentioned that she had already considered that possibility before, but she hadn't found the priest's body that day. Gil Roshan replied that they were still busy with the favor he had requested. At that moment, a group of goblins had been tied to a tree. The assassins were arguing among themselves over who had caught the best creature. One of them claimed he had captured an excellent goblin. Another said his was bigger and that Gilroshan would definitely prefer it. The commander appeared, calling them all idiots. He said true faith required constant and genuine belief. Meanwhile, he was carrying a huge creature himself. The others began complaining that he was cheating, but the commander replied that he had worked hard to capture that creature, so there was no reason to leave it behind. One of the assassins then asked what he had done with the people who had been captured by the goblins. The commander explained that he had gone there as a savior and freed everyone. He said he had sent all the victims back to the village because that was the will of Eolim, and that everyone should be grateful to the god of vengeance. With preparations complete, the assassins were getting ready to call Gilroshan. Once again, they began to argue among themselves over who would have the honor of going to him. The commander interrupted, saying that while Gilroshan might become a disciple, there was still no official confirmation from the archbishop. There was no certainty yet that he was a prince from the enemy empire. Therefore, until they had definitive proof, they needed to be cautious before becoming too attached to him. The commander then asked if Urgal would participate. He promptly confirmed, obeying without question. Urgal, however, thought that this was a great opportunity. He wanted to better understand Gilroshan's plan, and depending on the situation, he might need to settle things right then and there. Meanwhile, Gilroshan said it was time to put some things into practice. Sui, confused, asked what he was talking about. He explained that he had asked the priesthood to clear the goblin outpost in that region, and that the mission was probably already completed. In his thoughts, he commented that this was what they called, in game terms, being carried by allies. Carls and Sui were confused by the expression. Then Gilroshan said that he himself would deliver the final blow to the creatures. It was then explained what hunting grounds were. One of the first areas where novices hunted was the scary goblin barracks, a territory inhabited by the most skilled goblins in the region. Gilroshan also mentioned another advantage to his plan. They knew the weakness of Marquis Reit. Carls confirmed that he was aware. The commander's swordsmanship wasn't compatible with his mana, which created a vulnerability. Sui said she had also heard rumors about that. People said Reit didn't use his mana efficiently during combat, but Gilroshan replied that this wasn't his real weakness. The true weakness was his right shoulder, which was severely paralyzed. In the game, Marquis Reit appeared with that injury, although the reason behind it was never explained. Sui was surprised and asked if he was sure about that. She had never heard of such a detail. She wanted to know where he got that information and what the source was. Gilroshan thought quickly and decided to make something up convincingly. He said he had overheard a conversation between His Majesty and the captain. Sui then accepted the explanation, saying that if it came from them, it must be true. Carls reflected and commented that if that were real, it meant the commander couldn't use any of the Vanguard sword techniques, since they required the use of both arms. Gilroshan confirmed that this was exactly the point. Vanguard swordsmanship was an S-rank technique, a secret art of the Reit family, one of the most renowned in the Empire. Its style was based on offensive dual-blade combat focused on continuous attacks. The unique feature of the technique was this: if the user wielded two weapons with both hands, the damage of their attacks increased by 20%. It was a high-level technique and was precisely the art that brought Elron Reit to the level of a 9-star warrior, perfectly matching his aggressive style. Sui then concluded that if he couldn't even use his own techniques anymore, Gilroshan really had a chance. But Carls was still skeptical. He said that even with that issue, the Marquis was still a swordmaster. He was strong enough to defeat a 7th-star fighter using only one arm. To him, Gilroshan didn't stand a chance against that. The prince wondered whose side Carls was really on. Was he just too loyal, or was he trying to discourage him? Even so, Gilroshan admitted it was a valid point, but he asked how they would react if he said he knew exactly which techniques the Marquis would use, even with only one working arm. He thought that in the god-abandoned world, combat techniques had affinities with each other, so even a seemingly useless technique could become powerful, depending on how it was used. He recognized there was a high chance he could be disarmed during the duel, but he was prepared. That was when Urgal approached, saying he knew that wouldn't be enough to disarm the prince. Gilroshan was startled, as he hadn't realized he was there. Urgal coldly said he doubted the prince had enough strength to withstand even a single blow from the Marquis. He wanted to know if he was wrong. Gilroshan admitted that it was difficult for him at the moment. That was exactly why he was there, to obtain the strength elixir. It was a rare consumable that temporarily increased the user's physical strength drastically. Urgal wondered to himself whether Gilroshan really planned to fight the king of the mountains. Even with the support of the vengeance assassins, that creature was a high-rarity monster. But before he could finish finish his thoughts, Gilroshan interrupted, saying they knew they weren't strong enough to defeat the creature now. That was why they were waiting for the helpers to show up. That was when one of the captured goblins rebelled, telling the humans to stay away. Gilroshan observed all the good work the assassins had done. He thought that, unlike in the game, those creatures were living beings. He didn't want to kill, but he had to. If he wanted to survive in that world, he would have to learn how to kill. After eliminating the goblin, Gilroshan leveled up. He felt a warm sensation spread through his body, a strange sense of satisfaction. He had received a skill point, and his skill tree was finally unlocked. He thought that, adding it to the 2 points he received at the start of the game, he now had 3 points to distribute. He decided to learn the martial arts of the Wanderer, which gave him a 1% bonus in energy and strength stats. He knew he needed to quickly reach level 9, where he would unlock techniques better suited to facing the Marquis. But for now, he was still only at level 1. The path ahead would be long. Determined to move forward, Gilroshan killed all the remaining goblins in the area. With each defeated enemy, he leveled up and earned more points. He used 4 of them to learn a skill called Extreme Training. With that, he became better at dealing with emergency situations and also gained a 1% bonus to his intelligence stats. Later, Gilroshan started to wonder if he was feeling different. Sui noticed the change and asked what he had done while no one was looking, because he really seemed like a different person. Gilroshan thought that all those new skills were amazing. He could feel his body getting stronger and believed that the assassins had prepared excellent resources for him. Curious, Sui asked where the other items were, because she wanted to grab some too. However, the prince replied that he had already dealt with all of them. Sui then teased him, asking if he had been thinking about his master while doing that. She called him ungrateful and greedy, while Gilroshan reflected that she was only 19 but already acted that way. The commander asked what they should do next. Looking at his companions, Gilroshan took the lead and said there were probably still some goblins left in the area. He decided he would hunt them all down himself, both to train and to practice his swordsmanship. He thought the last fight hadn't been enough, and that he needed more experience to improve his technique. Soon after, a goblin army appeared before them. Carls and Gilroshan took position to face them. Sui said she would take care of only 2 goblins. One of them rushed at Gilroshan with a knife. Although he was a bit nervous and clumsy, he managed to defend himself. He blocked the blow and wondered how such a small creature could be so strong. Still, he dodged the attacks and took advantage of openings. He thought that maybe it was thanks to the Slave Warrior card, because using the sword felt less awkward than he had expected. In fact, he was doing very well for a first-timer. He noticed that his strikes were hitting vital points, just like in the game, and he killed the goblin with precision. He found the experience even better than he had imagined, and felt excited to continue. Gilroshan continued the hunt for a long time. During that time, he would hit his own head against trees and rocks to take advantage of his preference for masochism, thereby increasing his physical and mental regeneration. Seeing this, Carls became worried and said that maybe it was enough for one day. It was already night, and he mentioned that both he and the assassins were exhausted. Gilroshan agreed, saying he was right. He decided they would stop for the day, and suggested having a beer. The assassins thanked the great god of vengeance, Aeolum. Later at the camp, everyone was relaxed, drinking, laughing, and telling stories. However, while this was happening, Reit's army was watching from a distance. The platoon captain was confused by what he was seeing. The prince was with Carls, and the soldiers asked the vice captain what they should do, but he was in shock. He couldn't even come up with a plan. He thought that over the past few days they had tried to erase their tracks, but now they had a lit campfire, no camouflage spells, and were even drinking. It looked like an open invitation to be found. Even though only a few of them were drinking, that included Prince Gilroshan himself. The situation was confusing. It could be a trap, but at the same time it didn't look like one. The orders were to kill the kidnappers, but the third prince was not acting like someone who had been kidnapped. Carls and Sui were also with him, which made everything even more suspicious. The vice captain, determined, stood up and headed toward the camp unarmed. He asked the elite knights to stay where they were. He wanted to go ahead alone to find out what was really happening. The group at the camp was surprised to see him. They recognized him as Sir Philid, a knight of the Special Forces. He said he was glad to see His Highness safe, but wanted an explanation, especially from Carls. He asked if he, Sui, and the prince had betrayed the Empire. The third prince was known to be a troublemaker, but this situation went beyond all limits. Philid repeated the question directly to Carls, who replied that His Highness would explain everything. But before that, he thought Philid should greet His Highness properly. Sui appeared and agreed. Gilroshan, observing them, thought they really could be trusted. Philid was visibly irritated but bowed to Prince Gilroshan and formally introduced himself as as vice captain and leader of the Special Forces Night Squad, burned Philippe. The prince asked him to rise and told the others he would like a moment alone with Philippe. He said it was a pleasure to see him again, and that he knew they had been running around for days without covering their tracks. He also stated that he was sure Philippe had already noticed how absurd the situation was. He explained that the priests of vengeance were just trying to distract the unit pursuing them. Philippe asked why the prince would do something like that, and Gilroshan replied that it had been his own order because he was waiting for Philippe to arrive. Seeing the knight's doubt, the prince explained that first of all he had not been kidnapped. He was actually planning to go with the priests of vengeance to Arax, and for that, he would need to pass directly by his superior, Reit. He asked Philippe not to look at him as if he were crazy, but the vice captain silently thought that as much of a troublemaker as the prince was, there were limits that should not be crossed. Philippe then tried to confirm if he had understood correctly and asked if the prince was truly betraying the empire. Gilroshan questioned whether it was really necessary to explain all that, as it was something he could not even discuss with the Marquis himself. The vice captain became visibly nervous at the response, while the prince thought that he needed to assert his authority more directly. Like it or not, he was still a prince. Gilroshan said it was getting late and suggested they depart the next morning since there was still a place they needed to visit before leaving. He explained that it wasn't anything major, just a way to get rid of an insect that had been bothering the citizens of the empire. He said this to Philippe because he hoped he wasn't planning to attack the priests during the night, since he had served under Commander Reit long enough to know the secret behind Karl's birth. Philippe was surprised by that statement and asked how the prince knew about it, but Gilroshan simply silenced him and asked that no trouble be caused. He just wanted the night to pass peacefully and suggested they meet in the morning. With that, he returned to the camp, while Philippe wondered if that was really the same useless prince from before. Maybe the rumors were wrong, or perhaps he had gone completely insane. The next morning, with the fire already out, Gilroshan appeared visibly more prepared. He was thinking about the sword technique that Marquis Reit used despite his paralyzed arm. It was the Trafalgar sword technique, a style inherited from the knights of the Kingdom of Luxon. This technique was based on quick strikes, with an emphasis on defense and arcing movements. Its special effect was versatility, as it could be used with any type of weapon, not just swords. For a knight, a sword is like a lover. For a marquis, it goes beyond that. The sword represents his ego, his will, and is the symbol of the Reit family head. Therefore, he would never part with his sword. Meanwhile, Gilroshan continued to improve and was learning a different technique, the Nomad's quick sword technique, ranked as C. This technique had been created by a nomadic group that wandered the southern region of the continent and carried vengeance in its essence. It focused on extremely fast movements and had a hidden secret within it. Despite its seemingly lower rank, Gilroshan was using the technique with ease. He was impressed by how well it suited him. The Trafalgar technique was rank B, while the Nomad's was rank C, but in that world's combat system, techniques were divided into 3 styles: dominant, quick, and flow. The dominant style used strength and weight to overpower the enemy. The quick style relied on speed to close distances, and the flow style exploited openings with smooth arcing strikes. There was a rock-paper-scissors relationship between them, where each style countered another. In that system, quick techniques were very effective against flow-style techniques. Thus, even being rank C, the Nomad's technique could surpass rank B techniques and reach close to the level of a rank A, offering a clear advantage against Reit. That made the situation even more interesting, since the Kingdom of Len, where Reit's technique came from, strictly followed the dominant style. They had hunted and enslaved the Nomads, which led to the creation of that technique as an act of resistance. Although the Nomads had been defeated, they left behind the technique as a symbol of vengeance against Trafalgar. Gilroshan realized that even if it was ranked C, it would be the most useful technique against the enemy he would face. Karl's announced that everything was ready for departure, and as Gilroshan followed, he thought that this technique represented his hope for survival. Later, the Special Forces and the assassins stood face to face, clearly distrustful of one another. Although they didn't get along, they were united by a common cause. Gilroshan had forgotten how much they hated each other, so he preferred to adopt a more cautious strategy, focusing less on direct damage and more on control. He asked if everyone had understood the plan. Bamilo said yes, but asked not to hear the same explanation for 10 minutes straight. Felid also confirmed he understood, but Gilroshan noticed that no one was really paying attention to him. He found that a bit frustrating and thought maybe he should have reconsidered before taking on that role. Urgel commented that the prince should go inside the cave too, because no one would listen to instructions instructions if he stayed outside. The prince agreed and asked if Carls could slap him in the face, just to get the group's attention. He said it was fine, it was for their own survival. Carls hesitated, saying he didn't want to do that, but as soon as Gil Roshan insisted, he ended up getting slapped. Gil Roshan bit his tongue and thought it would have been better to take the hit after he finished talking. Still, he took a deep breath and declared that he would personally lead the attack. He asked everyone to keep that in mind, because once they entered the cave, they needed to stop fighting among themselves and simply follow his orders. He said that otherwise, none of them would make it out alive. The Mountain King of Lockman was extremely dangerous. He emphasized that it didn't matter if they were from the Vengeance Priesthood or the Special Knights. Without discipline and coordination, they would all die. Then, finally, it was time to enter the cave. Inside, the Mountain King was asleep on a bed made of bones. Suddenly, he stood up after catching a scent in the air. He said something smelled delicious. Fresh meat was entering his cave. Philippe was shocked as soon as he entered. He saw that the pile of bones was made entirely of human remains, without a doubt. He realized how dangerous the monsters in that region were, and though a bit embarrassed, admitted to himself that he hadn't grasped the gravity of the situation until then. Now he would have to fight alongside the rebels to defeat the creature. He thought he hadn't truly believed such a monstrosity existed, but now it was real. The Special Forces Knights would take responsibility. Even if it cost them their lives, they would avenge the citizens and slay that monster. With that, everyone charged at the Mountain King. Bamilo commented that regardless of what the knights did, vengeance always belonged to the priest of Aeolum, and he sent his assassins to move in just behind the knights. Philippe was the first to strike. He tried to land a blow, but had to dodge a brutal attack from the monster. The king's strikes were heavy, but also surprisingly fast. Even so, Philippe managed to hit one of the Cyclops' eyes, though the damage was almost nothing. The eye regenerated almost instantly. Philippe then understood that it was exactly as the third prince had explained. The monster's eyes did not suffer real damage, even though they were technically weak spots. This happened because they were protected by a type of defensive magic. He warned the other knights that the first thing to do was to cut through the creature's tough skin. However, even with all the assassins and knights attacking at the same time with their blades, they could barely cause any damage. It was clear that the skin had to be broken first. Carls noted that this was expected, as the Special Knights were not just skilled swordsmen, but also had great speed, comparable to that of assassins. Gilroshan added mentally that although they were technically knights, those warriors specialized in ambushes and assassinations. He thought that thanks to the team's composition, they would likely get through the first phase of the battle easily, as they had several members capable of quick damage. The real problem would be the second phase, when the Mountain King stood up completely. Looking around, he wondered where Irgil was and asked Sui to start preparing her spell in advance. Meanwhile, Gilroshan reflected that all of this showed why he disliked players. The Mountain King continued taking many hits until he finally stood up fully, initiating the second phase of the battle. Gilroshan shouted for everyone to retreat at once. The monster unleashed a strike so powerful that it made the entire cave shake, but at that moment Sui's spell was ready, and she launched a burst of flames directly at the creature's face. However, the Mountain King still resisted, as he had strong resistance to fire. When he roared, the psychological impact was so intense that Sui became paralyzed, unable to move her body. She was about to be struck when Bamilo appeared, distracting the Cyclops at the last second. Soon after, the other knights and assassins emerged, attacking the monster from multiple angles, leaving it confused and disoriented. Gilroshan thought that although they were doing a good job of distracting the enemy, the real problem had just begun. During the second phase, the king's physical resistance increased significantly, as did his regeneration. Sword attacks were now practically ineffective, as he healed far too quickly. Bamilo, realizing this, concluded that defeating such a creature in the traditional way would be impossible. He considered the possibility that they might need to use a spirit sword. Gilroshan agreed that infusing mana into the blade would be more effective, but it still would not be enough to defeat that monster. The most important thing would be to reduce the creature's magical resistance. He thought that if they could land the right strike, Sui, as a level 7 master mage, could finish the necessary spell. The strategy was now simple. Distract the monster as much as possible so that Sui could cast her spell again. Instead of focusing on using spirit swords, the best option was to channel mana into their own bodies to move faster and more nimbly, dodging the Mountain King's attacks until the decisive spell was ready. Gilroshan said it wasn't that hard, and that in fact, this was exactly the plan they were already executing. The creature was being distracted by several fighters who struck and dodged around it, trying to create an opening. One of the assassins took advantage of one such moment and managed to slash the Mountain King's leg, causing a superficial but still useful wound. The assassin boasted, saying that assassins were clearly better than knights, which irritated the knights to the point that they nearly started a fight right right there. At that moment, Sui had finally finished preparing her spell. However, there were still allies within range of the explosion. Someone asked Gilroshan what they should do, as if Sui cast the spell now, everyone nearby would be hit. Gilroshan was irritated by the obviousness of the situation. They should have retreated already, so he shouted, ordering everyone to move away immediately. But Bamilo and Felit were arguing with each other, each accusing the other's group of getting in the way. This argument delayed both sides, and because of it, one of the knights was violently thrown by the creature. The Mountain King began growing even stronger. One of the assassins commented that he had expected this and criticized the knights, saying they weren't fast enough and that the rebels were superior. But right after saying that, he too was thrown against the cave wall. Gilroshan thought that the one thing no one could afford to do in a battle like that was to lower their guard. With the right team, all a player needed to do in a fight like that was move according to the boss's patterns. In the game Abandoned by God, this was simple for experienced players. They knew they couldn't relax until the battle was over, but the warriors there were doing exactly the opposite. They had let their guard down too early, including himself. If the fight reached the third phase at that pace, not only would the others die, he would die too. He knew he had to find a way out, but his thinking was stuck. Then Carls placed a hand on his shoulder to calm him down. Carls told him not to worry. He was the sword and shield of the third prince. Besides, both the Special Forces Knights and the Priests of Vengeance had been through situations like this before. They could handle it. He said he was glad to see the prince regaining his old self, but also noticed that he was trying to carry too many responsibilities alone. And if one day that burden became too heavy, he should not hesitate to ask for help. He said this with a gentle smile, and Gilroshan thought that was exactly the kind of thing characters say before they die. Meanwhile, the knight who had been thrown was being helped by Felit, who thought he just had to hold the monster off a little longer. He reflected on the two central points of Gilroshan's strategy. The first was to keep the monster away from Sui, and the second was to give her enough time to cast a powerful spell that would strike directly at the creature's chest. But with so many allies injured, fewer people remained in combat, and those who did were beginning to tire. Even so, Felit focused. If it was to avenge the citizens who had lost their lives, he had to do his part properly. He quickly charged toward the Mountain King, who did not expect such a fast attack. He was hit by Felit, who shouted that this was the opening. Sui then finally released her spell, and a blast of fire struck the creature's back with full force. Felit believed that would be enough, but he soon realized the monster was coming straight for him. He wondered why Sui, who had cast the spell, wasn't the target. She was the one who attacked, but it seemed the Mountain King had chosen him. He thought it was already too late to escape. He tried to block the blow from the giant axe, but it wasn't enough. He was thrown backward, coughing blood. On the ground, he wondered if this was the end of his life. He told himself it had been an honor to serve the captain all those years. Then Bamilo appeared and saved him at the last moment. He said there was no need for thanks. The most important thing now was to survive. He commented that the monster probably started focusing on Felit the moment he stood out too much by fighting alone. Now they would work together to cover the gap left by those who were wounded. Felit agreed to fight with the group, but made it clear that this time he would do so only at Gilroshan's side. Meanwhile, the captains of each team were executing a precise strategy. Their movements were so fast that the Mountain King was starting to lose track of them, unable to follow the attacks. At the same time, he was constantly hit by spells cast by Sui, which left the creature even more disoriented. Gilroshan watched everything and realized the plan was working perfectly. Felit and Bamilo were playing their roles flawlessly, and Sui, confident, showed her command of magic, explaining that this was what true sorcery looked like. However, the situation suddenly changed. A strange energy enveloped the body of the Mountain King, and Gilroshan quickly recognized it as the activation of the creature's third phase. He knew that in this stage, the monster lost much of its physical and magical resistance, but in return gained an absurd increase in its attack power. As its health decreased, it began to attack without any defense, in a state of uncontrollable rage. Its behavior became unpredictable, and it started focusing exclusively on the weakest member of the group. Unfortunately, that target was Gilroshan himself, who received a deadly glare from the creature's demonic eyes. He immediately understood that he would be hunted. Being the lowest level among them, there was no way to escape. The creature roared with fury, but before it could attack, something unexpected happened. A huge stalactite fell from the ceiling of the cave, hitting the Mountain King directly and killing it instantly. Gilroshan was shocked by what he saw and could not understand how it was possible. In the game, he knew it was not even possible to see the ceiling at that stage of the battle. The one responsible was Irgal, who used a completely unexpected strategy. Everyone present was surprised, and both the assassins and the knights celebrated together. Bamilo praised Felit, who responded by saying that Bamilo had also done a good job. Still confused, Gilroshan wondered if there was something in the game he did not know about. That was not normal. The way Urgal had defeated the dungeon boss was something impossible to achieve by the usual game rules. He suspected that man was also a player. When Urgal walked past him, Gilroshan mentally questioned his identity. Then he understood that Urgal had repeated a phrase he himself had said earlier, just to provoke him. It was a direct provocation, and now Gilroshan was certain of one thing. Urgal was a damn bastard. After the victory, everyone headed to the Mountain King's treasure room, hoping to find a great reward. But to everyone's surprise, the place was filled only with old dusty barrels. Falit, confused, saw no value in the room, but Gilroshan noticed that the barrels were full of alcohol. He began to suspect that the whole battle had been motivated just by a search for booze. Falit wondered if it was really possible for someone to do all that just to drink. That was when Bamilo appeared and informed everyone that the Mountain King had been defeated and they could now leave. The citizens who were trapped there immediately recognized Bamilo. To them, he was the savior sent by the god Aolam. But Bamilo explained that he was not the god himself, only a priest, a servant of the High Church of Aolam. Before he could continue, Falit stepped forward, saying that he was part of the special forces and that they were there to rescue them. Despite this, the citizens' reception was hostile. Many were outraged, saying that the Empire had arrived too late. One man, consumed by grief, shouted that his son was already dead, devoured by the creature, and questioned why they had not come earlier. He blamed the knights for all the suffering they had endured. That pain was unbearable, and now that everything was over, only emptiness remained. The special forces were heavily criticized, and the residents began to show support for the temple of the god of vengeance. Falit, visibly shaken, tried to apologize, but his words were not enough. Then the prince appeared, defending him for a moment. He explained that the appearance of the Mountain King was something extremely rare. Creatures of that level did not usually appear near villages, which made any kind of prediction difficult for the special forces. He also said that by coincidence, he had encountered the priests of the temple of the god of vengeance, and together with the knights and imperial soldiers, they managed to defeat the creature. After the explanation about the battle and its dangers, Gilroshan himself, known as the Third Prince, promised that the commander of the special forces would take care of everything from then on. He guaranteed that the people would have proper security and reinforced protection. Then, to everyone's amazement, Gilroshan lowered his head in a gesture of respect and sincerely apologized for what had happened. That gesture moved everyone. Falit, upon seeing it, was deeply shocked, as he never imagined a member of the royal family would do something so humble. The citizens began to wonder if it was really him, and Gilroshan answered yes. He revealed his full name as Gilroshan Valt, the third prince of the empire. That was his true identity. Many were confused and asked each other if this was the same prince always associated with scandals and trouble. But upon witnessing his demeanor and sincerity, they began to feel moved. Several of them had lost their families in that tragedy, but now they felt they needed to move forward. The prince had promised a better life, and because of that, perhaps it was still worth continuing to fight. The pain they felt would become strength to start over. They had to live the best they could, in the name of those who had passed. Gilroshan, in turn, reflected that there was no real joy in defeating a creature like the Mountain King. Monsters like that were not rational and rarely guarded great treasures. That is why it was necessary to prepare for the next event, because this world truly seemed abandoned by God. The real reason he had killed the creature was different. What he really wanted was the eye of the Mountain King, a rare item essential for creating the strength elixir. Saving those people was not his main objective, but it ended up becoming part of the path. As he thought about this, one of the commoners timidly approached and asked the prince to lift his head. He said Gilroshan was completely different from what the rumors said. He felt that the prince was, in fact, human like everyone else there. That is why he begged for a single favor. His son, named H, had died, and even though it was just a commoner's name, he asked the prince to remember him. The man pleaded for Gilroshan to never forget his son's name. The prince firmly replied that he did not need to worry, as he would never forget it. Meanwhile, Commander Reit was receiving the mission reports and trying to better understand what had happened. He asked Falit if the prince had really changed that much, and if that was why he had risked going into the forest alone with the rebels. The vice captain recounted the events, but the commander seemed confused. He asked if it was Falit's first time with the prince. Falit answered that he had heard many rumors about the third prince, and that the survivors themselves were saying Gilroshan should become the next king. But Commander Reit did not want to hear any more of that. To him, it was already too much nonsense for one day. He said the focus now should be on taking care of the survivors, and affirmed that he would see everything with his own eyes later. Back at the camp, Gilroshan was complaining about the state of his bodyguard, who was completely drunk. He commented that he thought the guard's duty was to protect him, but now the man was wasted, barely able to stand. He begged him for God's sake to control his drinking. That was when Reit appeared, apologizing for the delay. Gil Roshan received him saying he understood as he knew Reit was a busy man, but still acknowledged that he had taken longer than expected. Reit mentioned he had heard surprising things about the prince from the vice captain, and Carls looked a bit embarrassed about something. When Reit turned to the prince, his expression changed completely. He asked if it was true that he intended to go to Arax. Gil Roshan confirmed. He said he knew Reit's concerns, but that he was going to change, and for that, he needed to reach Arax. He stated that even if Reit tried to stop him, he would go through. Reit was stunned. He thought the prince had gone completely insane. He asked if it was a prank or a bad joke. He said he deserved more respect, as he was one of the only 3 in the entire continent who had reached the 9-star level of the sword. He said the prince would never be able to defeat him, and wanted to know exactly how he intended to get past him. Faced with this, Gil Roshan even swallowed hard, but Reit continued. He said he had no intention of letting him go to Arax. On the contrary, he planned to send him back to the palace and eliminate all the rebels hiding in the forest. That was when Gil Roshan stood up with determination. He declared that he wanted a formal duel with Reit and invited him to follow him outside. After a moment of silence, Gil Roshan asked why he had not stood up yet. He asked if he was afraid, if he was scared of losing, and even suggested that maybe his shoulder was too bad for that, maybe even rusty. Reit commented that he honestly did not know how Gil Roshan had found out about the injury to his shoulder. But if the prince's goal was to provoke him, then it had worked. As the head of the Reit family, he accepted the challenge. Outside, the two took their positions for combat, and Reit asked what rules would be set. When Gil Roshan heard his opponent's firm voice, he realized Reit was not afraid. There was no trembling at all. Reit feared neither defeat nor death. Perhaps he believed that no matter what the prince did, he would win anyway. Gil Roshan asked Carls to announce the rules. The first was that only swords could be used, with no magic or mana. The second stated that no additional defenses were allowed, such as shields or heavy armor. The third and final rule was that if anyone lost their sword or was disarmed, they would automatically lose the match. Reit agreed to all of them without hesitation. He said none of that was a problem for him. The system immediately triggered a sudden event called Noble Duel. The objective was to defeat the opponent Elron Reit. Many of the knights in the special forces, upon realizing what was happening, began to criticize the prince. They said he had gone completely mad, that it made no sense for someone like him to challenge the commander. One of them mocked that the third prince was just a brat who had probably never been punched in his life. Another said it was typical behavior from the disgrace of the imperial family. A completely useless boy. Philippe, however, remained silent, observing closely. Later, with both already prepared and without armor, Reit admitted that this was extremely unexpected. He had not imagined the prince would actually be ready for a duel, especially with rules so unfavorable for someone at his level. He commented that Vice Captain Philippe had personally said the third prince had changed. Still, he found it hard to believe that people could change so easily overnight. He was sure Gil Roshan had already heard countless rumors about himself, about his disastrous behavior and terrible conduct. He said maybe the prince was trying to be judged for all the mistakes he had made and that this duel was his form of punishment. But Gil Roshan was not shaken. He thought Reit talked too much and maybe was trying to become a swordmaster just with his tongue. He said he was not there to hear speeches. He had challenged the commander to defeat him because he needed to reach Arax and build his own foundation of power alongside his companions. If Reit did not agree with that, then he should defeat him. Even with the sudden change in his attitude, Gil Roshan knew exactly what he was doing. He was aware of what could happen and understood that his drastic transformation would be shocking to everyone, especially considering the reputation he had before occupying that body. Determined, he consumed the strength elixir, an item obtained from the Eye of the Mountain King, and prepared himself. He realized that many thought he was just a fool trying to play the hero, but there was no time to argue. His only option was to prove himself through action, so he stated that Reit should stop talking and attack. If he was still speaking, it was because he still thought it was worth mocking the third prince. Reit replied by asking if it was really worth it. He never imagined he would hear such words from Gil Roshan Vault. He thought it was absurd that a useless, worthless boy wanted to cross enemy territory alone while still recovering. He thought the prince talked too much, and if he wanted so badly to enter Arax, then he should prove it with his sword. Without further words, Reit drew his blade. In his mind, he decided that if Gil Roshan was not worthy of being Carl's master, he would not leave there alive. Seeing this, Gil Roshan realized he might have provoked too much, and that he was now truly in danger. Reit advanced slowly toward him, but firmly, like a predator. The prince knew he had to focus on the first strike. He tried to defend himself, managed to block the initial attack just barely, and began to read his opponent's movements, identifying weak points, as he did in the game. However, even seeing the vulnerabilities, he was too busy defending to counterattack. Still, he held up well. Even with Reit pressing him hard, Gil Roshan did not back down. A common fighter would have been defeated long ago, but he stood firm. Reit, impressed, commented that he was surprised by the third prince's skills. Even so, the attacks continued intensely and without pause. Gil Roshan thought that at this pace, he would have no chance of activating the special effect of the nomadic sword technique. He was being completely overwhelmed, with no opening to react. Reit then questioned what the prince was waiting for. He said Gil Roshan still did not understand who he was facing. He followed up with a powerful strike, completely breaking the prince's guard. He took advantage of the opening and landed a direct kick to Gil Roshan's stomach, knocking him to the ground. Even on the floor, the prince did not let go of his sword. He knew that if he dropped it, he would lose. Despite being hurt, he thought he needed to get up. But to his surprise, Reit, who stood right in front of him, did not finish the fight. He simply turned around in silence. Shortly after, Carls approached and asked if he was all right. Gil Roshan wondered why the duel had not ended there. That was the perfect chance to be defeated. He then asked Carls if he had lost. Carls replied that, technically, no. He still had his sword in hand, so he had not broken any of the rules. Still confused, Gil Roshan asked himself why Reit had not simply finished it then. Reit explained that it was part of a knight's honor. In a duel, one must never attack a fallen opponent. That was why he had returned to the center of the battlefield and expected the prince to do the same. But before that, Carls came closer and asked if the prince could still go on. Gil Roshan nodded, saying yes, that he could continue. Carls did not look very enthusiastic, but he understood his prince's message. He would believe in him and hope for his victory. Even so, Carls was visibly nervous and trembling, which Gil Roshan noticed. Before walking away, Carls had one last thing to say. He admitted that Reit's technique, Trafalgar, was very fast and had excellent flow, but in the end, it was still just a fluid-style technique. If the prince could use a technique even faster, he could break Reit's flow and win. He advised Gil Roshan to focus entirely on his opponent. Gil Roshan thought that maybe Carls did not fully believe in him, but he soon understood that what mattered most was preserving his health. He sincerely thanked him for the support. He said he would win and return in one piece. He mentally agreed with Carls. He really needed to break Reit's flow to be able to hit him. He would use his hit point vision to dictate the rhythm of the duel and choose the right places to attack. The perspective he had as a player was almost like cheating in this world, but that did not lessen the pressure. After all, attacking was one thing. Defending against Reit's strikes was something else entirely, and he still was not fully synchronized between the game and reality. Meanwhile, the commoners were divided between fear and support. No one really knew who to cheer for until a child took the first step. She shouted with conviction that the prince would win. Slowly, the other villagers began to follow, chanting that Gil Roshan would come out victorious. The prince, surprised by the reaction, even felt a bit embarrassed by the sudden support. He thought he still did not fully understand that world, but he understood the system better than anyone there. Reit, on the other side, asked if he was finally ready. Only then did Gil Roshan realize he had forgotten the most basic thing. He said yes, that he had been ready from the start. He was just a little nervous. He thought that if he could build a strategy, there was still a chance to win. That had always been his strength. Reit, shifting the focus away from the duel for a moment, commented that the third prince had done very well, that he still had the luxury of appearing relaxed. Gil Roshan replied that he only looked relaxed from Reit's perspective, but he still thanked him for the compliment. He then remembered the secret behind the nomad technique. The core of the technique was to be the counter to Trafalgar. It was a soft technique that could evolve if it entered the right rhythm, striking the same point 3 times. In the game, this was equivalent to a triple combo, and until then, he had not applied any of it. It was like he had gone into the duel without preparation. But now the real fight was about to begin. Now it was his turn. Reit, observing, noticed something different. The distinct red eyes of Gil Roshan, which symbolized his royal lineage, were different. He had seen that face many times, but it was the first time he saw that determined gaze. The prince launched his attack. The first strike was blocked easily, but even so, Reit recognized that he was much better than before. The second blow was also stopped, but it was precise. Still, Reit warned that it was not enough and nearly hit Gil Roshan, who felt the monstrous power of his opponent. Even so, he began to better sense the flow of his own technique clashing with Reit's. He managed to visualize the strike points, and when he saw the first opening, he did not hesitate. Even hitting Reit's sword, the blow was enough to break the first seal of the combo. Now he had 1 out of 3, enough to begin the proper progression of the nomad technique. Reit was confused. According to the prince's current skill, he should not have been able to execute that kind of move. He wanted to confirm if it had just been a coincidence, so he advanced at incredible speed. Gil Roshan barely noticed his approach, but held his ground. He knew he had to land the next points, so he continued that intense dance. The second hit was made even through Reit's defense. Now only one more was needed, but from that position, Gil Roshan could not not block the next attack, so he made a bold decision. He positioned his blade in a way that would block Reit's strike, even if it meant cutting his own arm. He thought it was worth it. With one more strike point, he could finally use his special technique. Reit, seeing that, noticed that the prince was smiling like a madman. But it was not just because he had managed to block the blow. Gil Roshan had also activated his skill, and in that instant, time stopped, exactly like it had the moment he first arrived in that world. Gil Roshan reflected that, in the end, he had managed to face Reit as an equal. The system acknowledged his feat and displayed a new notification. He had fulfilled the secret condition to evolve the Nomad Sword technique. It rose from rank C to rank S, becoming the legendary Cosmic Sword Art. Gil Roshan reflected on the origin of the ability he had acquired and concluded that the surviving nomads had probably created the Cosmic Sword Art. In the game abandoned by God, all content from the east of the continent was extremely rare, which made him realize how lucky he was to obtain it. The system then announced that he could choose one of 3 additional effects for his new skill. The options were Thousand Soldiers Strike, Substitution Technique, and Indestructible Wall. Without hesitation, Gil Roshan chose the Substitution Technique. This skill allowed him to swap one thing for another, working exactly as its name suggested. In this case, he could use the enemy's power against the enemy himself. Despite that, Gil Roshan realized that the effect of the Strength Elixir was about to end, which would make his victory against Elron Reit even harder. Having acquired a new technique was no guarantee of success. The two-handed sword he wielded was still heavy, and the commander still had superior physical strength, worthy of a 9-star knight. However, if he could redirect that monstrous strength against the opponent himself, then maybe he could disarm him, even if Reit was a master swordsman. The problem was that the elixir had worn off, and worse, Reit was not taking the fight seriously. To take advantage of that, Gil Roshan knew he had to force his opponent to fight in earnest. The system then notified that the game had returned to normal. Gil Roshan began using the first form of the Cosmic Sword. His strikes became more fluid, fast, and precise, which even impressed the surrounding knights. One of them commented that the prince was noticeably faster. Another added that even though it was a one-handed sword, it still required significant strength to be wielded with such speed. Some even wondered if the prince had been hiding his true skills from the start. One knight speculated that, at that rate, Reit might actually lose. But another scolded him, saying that was absurd. After all, Reit was known as a master swordsman, the hidden blade of the Empire, and he wasn't even fighting seriously. Even so, the balance in the exchange of blows between them was surprising. Reit then commented that it was interesting to see the prince using the Eastern Continent sword technique, which was a direct counter to the Trafalgar style. He mentioned that Philitte's assessment of Gil Roshan had been accurate. The prince had truly changed, and he acknowledged that. However, even if he had changed or rejected his former role, it didn't matter. Reit would not allow him to take Karl Cillian to Arax. Gil Roshan knew that was not the time for such a discussion. The commander was still calm, and that meant his plan was not working. The elixir's effect was ending, and he needed to make Reit fight seriously. He saw no other option but to provoke him directly, even knowing it was a risky gamble. For the first time, he decided to take a clear stance on the matter. He hated the idea of Karl's going to Arax. To him, Karl's was like a precious brother, someone who had grown up by his side. Protecting Karl's was more important to him than it was to Reit, who, despite being the biological father, had never been present in their lives. Even so, Reit's only reaction was silence. Gil Roshan was disappointed, as that was not what he expected. In the game's original story, Elron Reit was a model knight, loyal to the rules, with a strong sense of leadership and patriotism. Even so, there were 2 kinds of players he would kill: those who attacked him directly and those who spoke carelessly about Karl Cillian. Perhaps he was holding back because Gil Roshan was a prince, but Gil Roshan knew there was only one way to provoke a real emotional reaction from him, and that was by mentioning Karl's. He hoped this would make the commander charge at him like a furious bull, but a doubt still lingered. Was Reit truly as close to Gil Roshan as he seemed? At last, Reit simply sighed and said he didn't understand why the prince said those things when he knew nothing. But then, his anger finally showed. That was exactly what Gil Roshan wanted. Reit said that if it weren't for Karl Cillion's presence, he would have already taken the prince's head right there. And he added that if Gil Roshan wanted to die, that was exactly what would happen. The prince then asked if he was really willing to do that. Even if it was a duel, he was still a direct heir to the throne. Did Reit really think that his majesty would ignore a death threat made against one of the princes? Gil Roshan thought he already knew that the character Gil Roshan was a good actor, but now he began to wonder if he might have overdone it. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, Reit coldly replied that if His Majesty truly cared that much about the prince, he would never have been kidnapped. Even admitting that Gilroshan's techniques were difficult to deal with, he said that a fast sword meant nothing to him. While dodging another blow, Reit explained that the difference in experience between them was enormous. In his view, the outcome of the duel was already decided, so he mentally said goodbye to the prince as if he were about to kill him. However, in the next second, it was Commander Reit himself who ended up disarmed. The knights were confused, trying to understand what had just happened. The captain had dropped his sword, and Karl Cillian declared that the winner of the duel was Prince Gilroshan. The commoners began to cheer loudly for the prince, while the knights watched the scene with a mixture of surprise and disappointment. Sui commented that the prince had done incredibly well, and even joked that he looked handsome after defeating Reit. At that moment, the system announced that the elixir's effect had ended. Reincarnated, watching everything from a distance, was impressed by that final move. It looked like Gilroshan had predicted every step Reit would take, seconds in advance. He even smiled as he disarmed the commander, which indicated that it had all been part of a well-thought-out plan from the beginning. Gilroshan himself confirmed internally that he had won. He extended his hand toward Reit as a sign of respect, but the commander remained silent and still. Gilroshan then asked if he was refusing the result of the duel, and explained that the provocative words he had said earlier had only been a strategy, not something personal. Reit, still silent, reflected. At last he smiled and internally acknowledged that Philippe had been right. The third prince had completely changed. Then Reit bowed and firmly declared that he, Elron Reit, Patriarch of House Reit, admitted his defeat. He added that it had been a great honor to duel against His Highness. The system announced that the noble duel mission had been completed, confirming that Gilroshan had defeated Elron Reit. Even so, some knights began to complain. One of them said there needed to be a rematch. Another claimed something was strange and that the prince must have used some kind of magic. Some even said the duel should be considered invalid. However, Reit himself raised his sword and declared that no, the duel had been fair. His Majesty had established the rules and terms, and he had accepted them. Since he had lost his sword during the fight, he admitted that he would have died if it had been a real battle. Then he turned to the knights and asked if they considered themselves true knights. He said that knights who do not accept the result of a duel do not deserve that title. Embarrassed, the knights apologized to their commander. Meanwhile, Philippe was visibly happy with the outcome. Gilroshan, in his thoughts, acknowledged that he had been scared from the beginning. But once he managed to gather all the conditions and follow his strategy, he gradually became calmer. In the end, it seemed that Reit had truly acknowledged his defeat. He also admitted to himself that the commander was not wrong when he said there was a huge difference in experience between them. That was true in reality, but within the game, Gilroshan had lost so many times he had lost count. At that moment, Sui approached and practically threw herself on him, almost knocking the prince over. She smiled, saying that he really was her disciple, and praised him for the great job he had done. Soon after, Karl Cillian came over and asked if his wound was bleeding much and if he was all right. Sui commented that, thanks to that victory, she felt she was getting closer to becoming the new master of the Magic Tower. The prince replied humorously that he was indeed hurt, especially from having to carry that woman on his back. Shortly after, Reit approached and asked for a private conversation with Gilroshan. What caught the prince's attention most was the smile on the commander's face. He found that behavior strange, as he was not used to seeing Reit smile. Later alone, Reit explained that he had sent Sir Philippe to capture the assassins from the Church of Vengeance. He swore on his honor that they would be safe, since the prince had won the duel as promised. He also said that he could no longer oppose Gilroshan's wishes, but he was still the knight captain of the nation. Despite the ceasefire, he reminded him that Arax was enemy territory and extremely dangerous. Then he asked the prince directly what he planned to do in that place. Reit mentioned that he had completed missions in Arax in his youth, and for that reason, he knew well the dangers of the territory. He made it clear that Arax was not a place for the weak. Prince Gilroshan said he already knew Arax. To him, that city was the complete opposite of the imperial capital Kurtian. While the capital was organized, Arax was a chaotic place, resembling a labyrinth. Criminals and bandits were everywhere, and no one could ever predict the kinds of dangers that might arise in the black market, where even life and death were bought and sold. It was a city immersed in pure chaos, but despite that, it was still inhabited by some people. These people, however, were neither nobles nor part of the empire, like him and Elron Reit. Gilroshan explained that there were 6 armed groups in Arax, including 2 churches. One of those churches was the main leadership of the revolution. Upon hearing that, Reit asked him to stop stop, as saying the name of that church in vain could bring terrible consequences. It was explained that even mentioning the name of the leader of the armed revolution was already considered a very serious crime within the empire. Even so, Gil Roshan tried to reassure him. He said that his safety would not be at risk and that he had no intention of joining the revolutionary army. The reason he wanted to go to Arax was something else. He said that there was a unique opportunity there that he could not afford to miss. Reit, intrigued, asked if he was talking about the land of the dead dragons, and the prince confirmed it. He said his plan was to gain the ability to command a dragon. It was explained that in the Blue Mountains surrounding Arax, there was a place known as the land of the dead dragons. That place was a mysterious labyrinth where several dragon eggs had been placed. According to ancient rules, other races were forbidden from entering, but anyone who managed to invade the area would receive a special mission. If they completed it successfully, they would earn the right to command a dragon. Upon hearing that, even Reit was shocked. He asked the prince to be more rational, as the chances of making it out alive were extremely low. Gil Roshan, however, said that he was aware of the risk but believed it was not impossible. If he had already managed to defeat Reit in a duel, reaching Arax and overcoming the challenges of the land of the dead dragons did not seem so out of reach. Then he asked Reit to proceed with his second question. Reit wanted to know what he should report to the emperor once the prince left for Arax. A report was required, and he could not simply tell the truth. Upon hearing that, the prince remembered his father. The lunatic in question was Barishan Carlo, the 44th emperor of the magical empire of Volt. He was a cruel and tyrannical man, a true genius, and also Gil Roshan's father. He was considered one of the most powerful humans on Earth, but in short, he could be described as a lunatic. Gil Roshan then suggested that Reit could say he had become a prophet. Reit asked if it would not be better to say he was suffering from prophet syndrome, and it was explained that this condition appeared in people who had never learned magic but had gone through very deep traumas. These individuals developed precognitive abilities, but at a high cost. Their physical and mental health would deteriorate until they eventually died. Even with that explanation, the prince said he would not confirm that version, although at some point he had considered using it. He thought that excuse made some sense, but it was not enough. Therefore, he decided that the report should say he left to recover the Tear of Dawn, an imperial relic that had been stolen by the revolutionary army. The prince believed this excuse would work well, be convincing enough, and would probably ensure that he could leave without major complications. After that, he asked Reit what the third and final question was. Reit said it was not really a question, but a request. He wanted to know if they could depart the next morning. That way, everyone could rest, eat well, and receive treatment before the journey. The prince assumed Reit was asking this for Carl Cillian's sake, so he agreed. Later, the group set up camp, warmed themselves around the fire, and ate together. The commander was happy to be reunited with his son, and Felipe was completely drunk, saying that Bamilo was his hero. The next morning, everyone felt a bit awkward, because they had grown too close during the night, but only in an emotional way. They had only talked. Carl Cillian, while getting ready, admitted that he was feeling a little nervous. Sui also said she was unsure if what the prince was doing was truly the right thing. But Reit said that all preparations were ready for the prince and asked him to be careful during the journey. He did not know exactly what the prince was planning, but he was curious to find out who the third prince really was. He also asked him to take care of Carl Cillian. Gil Roshan replied that he would. He understood the message and promised to look after him. When they passed through the portal, they were already in Arax. Bamilo confirmed that the place was indeed Arax, and at that moment, the system announced that Gil Roshan had finally completed the mission called Escape from the Crisis. This had been the mission assigned to him as soon as he arrived in that world. Gil Roshan's survival and escape from the Empire's territory were events that had never happened in the original game's story, so he expected significant rewards. As a reward for completing the mission, he received 30 gold coins, a beginner's equipment set, the utility magic inventory, and a ticket to obtain a new card up to rank D. Even though it was only a rank D card, he considered it a very generous reward. At the moment, he was at level 9 and knew that upon reaching level 10, he would earn another card. If he managed to collect all, he would have 3 cards in total. Even though he didn't know exactly which card he would receive, the mere fact of getting a new rank 10 card was already a major advantage. Unneeded cards could be used as material to strengthen more valuable ones. He had already decided that the slave warrior would be the first to be consumed and hoped that the archmage would appear again. Suddenly, a guard appeared ordering the arrest of everyone who had come through the portal. These were the Titan's special forces, and despite their presence, Gil Roshan Gilroshan told Karl and Sui not to do anything. He explained that no matter what happened, it was essential to avoid any combat on Arax territory. They were on enemy soil, where no authority could protect them, and any conflict would draw unwanted attention. Arax was known as a lawless city, but being arrested repeatedly was starting to annoy Gilroshan. Bamilo commented that not resisting had been the smartest decision Gilroshan could have made. Of course, they would suspect his intentions. After all, the third prince of the empire declaring himself an apostle of Aeolum made no sense. No one would believe something like that. It was exactly the kind of deception expected from a prince considered useless. However, as he passed by, Bamilo whispered that if Gilroshan truly wasn't an apostle, he should never have tried to deceive the archbishop. The truth was that Bamilo hadn't betrayed him but had secretly helped. Even so, Sui still didn't understand and indignantly wondered how that traitor could have acted that way, calling him ungrateful. Later, already inside an office in Arax, the third prince was received by a woman who watched him coldly. She welcomed him to the city, but the reception had been quite aggressive. Gilroshan commented that he had held himself back from retaliating against the soldiers who had struck his neck. Moreover, he had brought all the assassins back to Arax alive. Still, he didn't understand why he was being treated that way. He wondered if that woman intended to play hardball with him. In silence, he reflected on how skilled Bamilo was as an assassin. While he had been dealing with Marquez, Bamilo had probably received several reports, maybe even sent by carrier pigeon. That meant they had had more than enough time to kill him. The woman before him was Hendel Fry, an archbishop of the High Church of Aeolum, with direct ties to the Revolutionary Army. She had nearly become a 9-star warrior fighting on the front lines against the Empire, but suffered serious injuries and had to retire. As an archbishop of the Church of Aeolum, which had also fought the Empire in the war, her hatred for the enemy had only grown. She probably wanted to use Gilroshan as a tool to strike back at the Empire. Her silence at that moment seemed like a way to force him to confess the truth. But in truth, Hendel said that his intentions wouldn't change anything at that point. Confessing now would make no difference. Gilroshan replied that he finally understood why the Empire's minister was in a panic. If he were in his shoes, he would also be walking on eggshells, afraid of being caught. Hendel was fascinated by how much he knew, but Gilroshan said that, unfortunately, he wasn't very interested in any of that. He said he had dueled Marquis Elron Reit, and that she, as someone who understood the weight of a sword fight, would understand. He had been the winner of that battle, and that was precisely why he was there now. He thought there was no reason to fear Hendel. If she wanted to kill him, she could try. It wouldn't be hard for her. However, he was sure she would regret it. Without him, she would not be able to stop the coming calamity. In exactly 10 days from that moment, an uncontrollable disaster would hit Arax. Countless lives would be lost, and the whole city would be consumed by chaos and terror. Hendel asked what calamity he was referring to. Gilroshan answered that it was the great earthquake of Arax. The High Church had a history of divine manifestations, and to them, a common earthquake wasn't a serious threat. But what was coming was far beyond that, a disaster that even a god's blessing could not contain. Gilroshan said that among all those present, Hendel was the one who knew best that divine power was not absolute. He suggested that the least she could do was untie him so they could have a more natural conversation. Hendel agreed, saying that every situation required a rational and well-thought-out solution. However, she sent the prince to the underground prison and simply left the room, placing him under the guard's watch. Inside the underground cell, Gilroshan found Karl and Sui, who thought he had come to rescue them. However, they were surprised to learn that he had also been imprisoned. Karl said that Bamilo had already left, but before that, he made sure to feed them and explain the current situation in Arax. The prince assumed the matter was likely about the internal conflict between factions. Sui was impressed with his guess and asked how he knew that. According to Karl, the Cathedral of Kashiris and the Titan Special Forces were pressuring the Church of Aeolum. They claimed the prince was a threat and should be expelled or even executed. He explained that the Revolutionary Army was divided into 6 main forces. The snake represented the Church of Aeolum, which was where they were. The fox symbolized the Church of Shiri, which was on the opposite side. There were also border guard and urban maintenance forces, responsible for protecting occupied territory. There was also the elite force, the first line of defense, and finally the Titans, the direct special forces. This whole group made up the Revolutionary Army, and each of the 6 divisions had a specific role. Even so, the leader of the army, someone equivalent to the Emperor of the Empire, had not yet spoken. Gilroshan figured that with his arrival, internal opinions must be divided. He asked if Bamilo had left any other message. Karl confirmed yes, but hesitated at first to tell him so as not to hurt the prince's feelings. He said that Bamilo had commented that there were many other people as intelligent as Gilroshan, and he shouldn't consider himself special. He warned that if he continued acting that way, he would end up buried in Arax. Sui commented that there was no way to refute refute that, which bothered Gil Roshan, but she explained that she wasn't agreeing. She just didn't know what to say. Carl asked if the prince was okay, and Sui tried to calm him down, saying she didn't mean to offend. She also pointed out that Bamilo wasn't exactly a trustworthy person. At that moment, Gil Roshan asked Sui to lift her feet. Beneath her was a secret passage. That was the hidden message Bamilo had left. The escape route was underground. The passage seemed old and neglected, full of cobwebs and dust, but it was still a way out. The prince commented that the depth wasn't so intimidating and suggested they go ahead. Carl asked why the prince was looking at him like that, and Gil Roshan replied that if there was danger down there, he was his knight. Carl, uncomfortable, said he hated spiders, revealing a side the prince didn't know about. Then Gil Roshan looked at Sui, and she complained about being an old lady who didn't want to be sent in first. The prince ordered everyone to go at once, but they quickly fell into the secret passage. Carl tried to catch Sui gently, but both ended up falling on top of the prince, who complained and told them to get off him. Down below, Hendel was already waiting for them. She said he had arrived quickly, just as Bamilo had predicted. The prince asked if they really had to hide in that place for a serious meeting, and Hendel explained that he already knew the answer. Even Bamilo believed that Gil Roshan had great potential. She emphasized that he wasn't being helped just because he was a prince. Many factions were watching, observing how she would handle the situation. That was why such a discreet meeting was necessary. Hendel stated that, officially, she wasn't even there. Still, she had chosen to believe in him. The system then announced that Gil Roshan had received a new mission called You Are the Fugitive, and I Am the Archbishop. This mission was directly linked to the internal conflicts of the Revolutionary Army and involved the Archbishop Hendel of the Church of Eolam herself. The goal was to establish cooperation between the two, even amid the chaos of internal divisions. The expected reward for completing it was the right to move freely through Arax, plus 3 additional items. This mission was usually only triggered in the game when the player built a close relationship with the Archbishop. However, Gil Roshan had achieved that with ease. He reflected that he had always been seen as a threat to Arax, but even so, he had come there only to try to gain the recognition of their god. Now, they were fully trusting him. Hendel revealed that the catastrophe Gil Roshan mentioned wasn't an isolated event. The church itself had also been expecting something similar. The prince was surprised, but Hendel continued. She said that there was an infiltrator in the Revolutionary Army, someone inside the church who was leaking information. She called this person a rat and stated that they wanted to eliminate him. When the prince asked where she got that information, she simply stared at him so coldly and intensely that it made him shiver. Firmly, she explained that their god had not predicted an ordinary disaster, but had made a prophecy. This god was known as the god of vengeance, not only for predicting calamities, but for warning about targets and threats. Gil Roshan asked if the information was still incomplete, and Hendel replied that, so far, what they knew was that the true target of the catastrophe would be the children of Arax. The beast behind it was hiding within the Revolutionary Army itself. They were doing everything they could to cover it up, but with the enemy infiltrated, every move had to be carefully calculated. It was an extremely frustrating position for everyone involved. Gil Roshan finally understood what was happening. Now it all made a lot of sense. He realized that Hendel didn't know exactly who the culprit was, but she knew the person could be seen. Thinking it over, he found the event quite interesting. As a prince, and trusting those present, Gil Roshan decided to share what he knew. He said that in 10 days, the Cathedral of Kishiris would attack the children of Arax during the Crimson Wind Rite. That rite was a traditional ceremony in which all the children of the region gathered. It was exactly during that occasion that the attack would take place. In the game, this event was called the Dead Children. One of the clerics of the Cathedral of Kishiris had been convinced by a twisted idea about the resurrection ritual practiced by the Order. Driven by that terrible belief, she planned to kill all the boys of Arax between the ages of 17 and 19 during the ceremony. This catastrophe was not prevented in the game, and the event ended like a true horror movie. Bamilo, upon hearing this, also thought everything made sense. If Hendel was right, all the clues pointed to the Cathedral of Kishiris. Carls, however, questioned if the prince hadn't simply made all of it up. Sui found the idea absurd, saying that killing their own nation's children during a ritual made no sense. But Guro Tan explained that all the children of Arax had to choose their affiliation after the ceremony. That was when they decided whether they wanted to become clerics, soldiers, or merchants. The Order of Kishiris, however, did not accept men as clerics. Bamilo confirmed this information, recalling that all members of the order were either women or castrated men. Because of that, the boys never even considered joining the order. Carls then realized that if the boys were of no use to them, perhaps they were being seen as potential members of other factions. Gilroshan agreed, explaining that, to the order, the boys represented valuable resources for their rivals, and that was why they wanted to eliminate them. Carls was shocked and thought it was all madness, questioning what kind of organization would do something like that. Sui also said it seemed impossible, since they were all supposedly part of the same army. Why would they harm one another? Hendel replied that even though they were in the same army, this was not the first time the Order of Kishiris had crossed the line. She admitted she did not know the current internal situation, but was certain that taking the prince out of prison had been the best decision. As Archbishop of the Church of Len, Hendel Fry formally requested the help of the Empire's third prince, Gilroshan, pleading with him to save the children so they would not be sacrificed. The prince received a mission titled Savior of the Children. He would have to uncover the evil plan of the Cathedral of Kishiris and protect the children. This mission was connected to another one, related to his escape and the involvement of another archbishop. Upon learning this, Gilroshan said he would help, since saving children was the right thing to do. But since they were asking for help, he thought he might as well ask for a reward. He wondered if he could receive some extra gold. Ren commented that she had heard Gilroshan spent money like water. The prince replied that he had changed, and that it wasn't much for her. It would be just 50 coins, for the sake of the children. The two people behind Gilroshan were even embarrassed to see him asking for money at a time like that. Even so, the system confirmed that he successfully negotiated. 50 coins were added to the reward, and he earned the title Novice Negotiator. Later, in the dense city of Arax, everyone was coming out through the sewers. Bamilo praised the group for their excellent work and wished no one would get hurt from then on. As he prepared to leave, Gilroshan asked him to stay a little longer. He said he would be sad if he left without saying anything. And besides, he knew very well why Bamilo hadn't stopped him until now. Bamilo grew worried, thinking this would only cause trouble. If this continued, the prince would be the end of him. He needed to get out of there. But Gilroshan held him back and said he wasn't done yet. He knew Bamilo remembered what they had agreed upon, so he wanted to continue. Bamilo replied that he was a busy man. Gilroshan then remarked that it was strange, because there was an archbishop he knew who had sworn in the name of Aolim to bring him anything he asked for from the empire. He wanted to know who that archbishop was. Bamilo said the prince really was someone who collected his debts. Gilroshan was even embarrassed, as he hadn't expected to hear such a compliment. Kos commented that he felt strange, as if they were doing something wrong. Sui replied that they were just stopping Bamilo from running away. When he said he couldn't get anything now, Gilroshan assured him that it wasn't anything dangerous. All he wanted were the eyes of Walakas, and he knew that with Bamilo's skills, he could get them. Bamilo, confused, asked what exactly they were talking about and if the prince even knew who the item belonged to. Gilroshan replied that he did. The eyes of Walakas belonged to the president of the Revolutionary Army. They were a demonic accessory, a pair of round glasses made by the demon race with the ability to trace the trajectory of an object or projectile. Gilroshan assured him that it was all right, and that he would never want Bamilo to get into trouble. The president of the Revolutionary Army was currently absent, and for that reason, Gilroshan explained that Bamilo could take the eyes of Walakas and escape without a problem. But Bamilo thought the prince still hadn't realized the gravity of the situation. He reminded himself that he was affiliated with the Revolutionary Army itself, and wondered how he could possibly steal something from the president of his own faction. Meanwhile, some bandits appeared in an alley. They said they had never seen that group around and quickly threatened everyone, saying they would have to pay a toll if they wanted to leave alive. One of them even called Bamilo an old man, which worried Gilroshan. He knew that poor bandit had no idea who he was dealing with. Bamilo was impatient with anyone who didn't work with him, and before the bandit could even finish speaking, he was already furious and had his sword in hand. But Gilroshan asked to leave it to him. He said it wasn't the time for distractions because the focus now was saving the children of Arax. Bamilo, confused, wondered what had gone wrong with the prince. However, Gilroshan assured him he could handle those bandits alone. He asked Bamilo to go ahead and said they would meet again after he got the glasses. He said it was all for the children. Bamilo thought he was joking, but he also knew Gilroshan was good at acting. When the rest of the group moved away, the bandits mocked Gilroshan, saying it was ridiculous that someone like him had stayed behind. The one in front said the prince wasn't lucky at all, but Gilroshan simply wondered who that strange trio was and why they kept nodding in sync when their leader spoke. He thought they looked like the Backstreet Boys. Gonchan commented that actually, it was the bandits who had gotten lucky since their lives were just spared. The leader of the bandits agreed, saying that now Gilroshan would give them everything the old man hadn't. But before the fight could start, Carls and Sui appeared. Now it was 3 against 3. Sui asked who those guys were, while Carls turned to the prince to check if he was all right. Gil Roshan replied not really, since he had just escaped from prison through the sewers. He definitely could be doing better. The bandit asked if he had allies, but said it wouldn't make a difference, because they would still be defeated. Impatient, he threw the other two bandits at the group. Carl stepped in front of the prince. With a single strike, he took down the first bandit and broke the second one's blades. Gil Roshan thought that was a bit much, since at that rate, he wouldn't gain any experience from the fight. When Carl was about to take down the third enemy, Gil Roshan asked him to stop, saying he wanted to fight too. But Carl refused. He said it was his responsibility. He was the prince's bodyguard, and when he spoke about carrying the burden, he meant it. Until now, he hadn't done anything truly useful for Gil Roshan. He hadn't been able to stop his kidnapping, and hadn't been effective afterward either. He didn't want to be just a burden at the prince's side. Gil Roshan realized he was still frustrated from the fight against the Mountain King, where he had only managed to make jokes to cover up his feelings. Gil Roshan wanted to explain that he wished to fight to gain experience and level up, but he understood Carl's feelings. Carl firmly said he wanted to continue by the prince's side as his sword and shield. At that moment, the bandits were already trying to flee, but were caught by a prison of flames cast by Sui, preventing any escape. The bandit leader panicked, asking why everyone there was so terrifying when they had only made a few threats. Sui replied that he could try to run if he wanted to become toasted bread. Then Gil Roshan declared that from that moment on, he was the prince of those alleys. Coming from the lowest corners of the empire, he would show no mercy. He asked if the bandit really thought he would walk away alive after all that. Gil Roshan struck the bandit behind him, making a deep cut across the man's chest. Sui asked if that was really necessary, thinking it had been a bit too much. Gil Roshan then realized he had used too much force. Unintentionally, he had activated his blood ability, a technique tied to sadism that infused his strikes with magic. For a long time, he had thought that ability was useless, but now he saw it could be quite effective. The bandit, gripped by fear, began to beg for mercy. He trembled so much, he looked ready to lose control of his body, promising to do anything to stay alive. The system announced that the group of bandits had been defeated, and Sui quickly used healing magic to keep them from dying. This happened because, in the end, they were spared by the prince's decision. Carl praised the ability used by Gil Roshan, saying it was impressive. However, Gil Roshan knew he was still far from his full potential. He compared himself to Reit, someone much stronger, and realized he needed to become far more powerful if he wanted to survive in that world. Carl asked what Gil Roshan intended to do with the bandit. The man was still on the ground, begging to be spared and promising not to cause any more trouble. Gil Roshan thought he already knew this pattern. Many delinquents in Arax said that, but later returned seeking revenge. If he let this group go, they would probably gather more allies and return to attack him later. While reflecting, Gil Roshan commented on what they had just called him. They were addressing him as Your Highness, and that caught his attention. He asked if the bandit's name was Thompson, and when he got confirmation, he said he liked his enthusiasm. Then he suggested Thompson start working for him. Thompson, confused, asked if the Prince of the Alleys wanted to hire him. Gil Roshan explained that it wasn't exactly that. He just needed to be taken somewhere, but he didn't know the way. Since Thompson seemed to know the streets and alleys of Arax well, he could lead him there. He said they didn't have much time, and that he didn't need to worry about the two injured guys, since they weren't dead. As they walked through the alleys, Gil Roshan took the chance to eat some street food. It was something simple, like a skewer or a sandwich, and he said it was delicious. He asked where it had been made, and Thompson replied that his mother had prepared it and packed it in his lunchbox. He said she cooked very well. At that moment, Gil Roshan hit Thompson on the head with a piece of the sandwich, asking if he didn't appreciate what his mother made. He said at least Thompson had a mother, since he himself had none. Carl stepped in, reminding him that his mother was the Empress. Sui asked if she was still around, and Gil Roshan thought he had forgotten that this reality was no longer the same as his past life. Thompson, increasingly confused, wondered why they were talking about emperors and empresses. It all seemed so absurd. Soon after, he informed them that the entrance to the black market that Gil Roshan was looking for was just ahead. He wanted to know if he could leave now, but Gil Roshan said no because he didn't know how to find his way around the black market. He needed Thompson to be his guide, since an invitation was required to enter. Gil Roshan made an agreement with the group about how they should refer to him inside the market. He asked Sui to call him disciple, Carl's to call him lord, and Thompson to call him sir. That way, they could communicate without revealing he was a prince. Then he asked why Thompson was still standing there and told him to go ahead. Thompson was afraid. He explained that only very influential people could invite someone into the black market. Someone like him would be beaten to death if he showed up there with a prince. Gil Roshan then asked what level Thompson thought was needed to enter that place, but told him not to worry. He promised not to let anyone lay a finger on him. He just needed to open the door. Scared, Thompson knocked weakly. Carls commented that he didn't even have the strength for that and asked if he had been eating properly. Thompson said it seemed like no one was on the other side and suggested they come back later. But Gil Roshan, impatient, slammed his fist hard against the door. Thompson, terrified, warned that this could cause a huge problem. Right after that, the doorman answered, asking who wanted to die. Thompson quickly introduced himself, saying he was bringing a newcomer, a new customer for the market. When the door opened, a gigantic man appeared, almost the size of the doorway itself. He looked at Thompson with disdain, saying that today's rookies had no respect. He complained that Thompson had knocked as if he owned the place and had brought buyers without permission. He wanted to know who had trained Thompson. Thompson tried to explain that the situation was different this time. Gil Roshan then stepped forward. He said new customers should be received with more respect. If the man truly wanted to make money, he needed to change his attitude. The huge man, seeing them all filthy and looking miserable, turned back to Thompson and asked again who had trained him. Without another word, Gil Roshan simply handed over a pouch containing 30 gold coins. He wanted to know if that would cover the entrance fee. The huge man was visibly impressed when he saw the 30 gold coins. His jaw even dropped. Gil Roshan told him he could check, then thought to himself that this was all the money he had left from the last mission he completed after arriving in Arax. Now he was giving it all just to pay an entry fee, which was a lot. However, the big man explained that if he was a customer, he didn't need to worry. The black market didn't charge an entry fee. That money could be used to buy something of value inside. Gil Roshan asked if he could really enter, and the man confirmed that he could. Even so, the prince suspected the man's intentions, imagining that he probably thought he would be an easy target inside. So he asked Thompson to keep being his guide. The big man then approached and put a hand on Thompson's shoulder, saying he needed to take good care of the new client. Thompson replied that he would do his best and welcomed them to the black market. Downstairs, Sui was surprised by the space behind the door. It looked like an underground colony full of tunnels. Thompson asked Gil Roshan what kind of product he was looking for. Gil Roshan said it was obvious. They were going to the upper floor where the VIP items were. Thompson then explained that he hadn't mentioned it before, but he was still just a recruit and probably didn't have access to the upper floor. Gil Roshan told him not to worry. Sui, excited, was already walking ahead. She was thrilled about seeing the black market. She said she felt a delicious mana calling to her, and Gil Roshan thought there she went again, chasing magical items. On the way, they passed an auction where a two-headed ogre was being sold alive, but Sui didn't even pay attention. She kept leading the group through the labyrinth until they found two large doors. She said there was a very luxurious mana behind them. Gil Roshan then asked his master to calm down, reminding her that they had come there to prepare for the calamity. Sui, disappointed, said all right, but Gil Roshan told her she might be able to get a magical item if she wanted. He wanted to make it up to her, since she was very angry with him the last time. He thought that sometimes she was surprisingly mature for her age, but other times it was clear she was still just 19. Sui became restless again and said that if someone appeared and got ahead of them, they could lose the chance. Gil Roshan thought she had completely ruined the moment. Still, he knew he needed to stay calm. If things got out of control because of her excitement, she might not get the magical item at all. Realizing this, Sui panicked but quickly focused and said she was calm. Now they could continue their search for the item. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, the Emperor received a report brought by Marquis Reit. He informed that the third prince had left with the revolutionary army, saying he intended to recover the Tears of the Dawn. The emperor laughed, saying it was a joke. To him, that brat couldn't even wipe his own backside, let alone recover an imperial treasure. Reit, known as the Lance of the Empire, confirmed that it was true. He said the third prince had really gone after the treasure. The emperor laughed even louder, which made even the personal butler nervous. He didn't believe any of it and asked if the marquis was there to make jokes. Reit replied that he was just reporting what he knew. The emperor allowed him to rise, saying he didn't suspect Reit, but still found it strange. Gil Roshan, the third prince, had never shown any value, and now suddenly acted like he had some kind of prophet syndrome. That didn't make sense. He then asked the butler where the commander of the imperial army was. The butler informed him that he had already arrived and was waiting for an audience. Reit remained in the room to watch. The commander was Cedric Penn, the duke known as the Hound of the Empire, loyal to the emperor. Reit questioned the sudden summons, but the emperor was direct. The duke should send discreet people to follow the third prince. If by some miracle he actually recovered the Tears of the Dawn, he was to be brought back to the palace immediately. Force could be used if necessary, and if the prince died in the process, they should bring the body. The emperor wanted to see with his own eyes if the boy truly had the so-called prophet syndrome, even if it meant losing a few people along the way. Nothing else mattered, just recover whatever was possible. Cedric responded firmly that he would obey his majesty. Meanwhile, Reit thought the emperor had to be insane to speak that way about his own son. Shortly after, the emperor dismissed everyone from the room and left. Still bothered, Reit reflected that he needed to warn the prince that he was being watched, but didn't know how, since the prince was in Arax. While he thought about it, they entered a room where there was an extremely luxurious, magical artifact. The room itself looked like a ballroom, full of people and merchants moving all around, with everything shining with wealth and brilliance. Sui was amazed, thinking the place looked like another world, completely unlike anything she had ever seen. Gilroshan asked her to stay calm, but Karl soon pointed out something strange. He had noticed that Ergal was in a corner of the room, visibly trembling. Gilroshan wondered why that man was there and why he looked so nervous, like a desperate dog trying to relieve itself. The prince realized that Ergal was clearly in trouble, so he decided to pretend he hadn't seen him. Thompson asked if they knew that man, and Gilroshan said yes, but that the two of them didn't get along. In fact, their relationship was rather awkward. Thompson warned that Ergal was coming toward them. When he approached, Ergal asked if they remembered him and tried to start a conversation, saying it was good to see them again. Gilroshan thought he was forcing a friendship and that it was quite annoying. Even so, they kept walking, ignoring him and simply saying they were busy. But when Ergal tried to call the prince, Karls immediately stepped forward and told him not to call Gilroshan that, since he was trying to keep his identity a secret. Ergal said he understood, but began explaining that in the black market, if someone bought several items at once, the prices were lower, like a wholesale deal. He suggested they join forces to get better prices, since they had survived life and death situations together. Gilroshan thought Ergal was just acting differently to get money, and decided he would rather handle everything alone. When Ergal asked him to wait, he leaned in to whisper that he was there to buy the shield of balance. Gilroshan knew that this was one of the most beloved items among players, and in fact, he himself had come looking for that very item. He said he was after the shield too, but that it didn't mean much. After all, the upper floor of the black market was the most likely place to find such an item on the entire continent. Still, he was certain that wasn't the only reason Ergal was there. Ergal admitted he didn't have enough money, and the prince saw an opportunity. He thought the guy was a loser and decided to take advantage of the situation. When Gilroshan asked how much he had, Karls looked a bit uncomfortable, but Thompson seemed excited. Gilroshan then asked if Ergal truly wanted the shield. Ergal transferred 92 gold coins and asked not to be scammed. Gilroshan replied that he always kept his promises, but made it clear he wouldn't do it for free. He imposed a simple condition. Once they left that place, Ergal would have to reveal his true identity. If he didn't want to, Gilroshan would return the money. Ergal agreed to the deal, but asked about Gilroshan's master, who had been there recently. The prince realized this could be a good opportunity. He asked Karls to look for Sui while he tried to find the item. However, he whispered in Karls's ear that if he really found her, he should strengthen the illusion spell. Soon after, Gilroshan used inventory magic to pull out the sacks of gold. Karls was curious and asked when he had learned to use that magic. Gilroshan explained that he had trained recently and that this ability was a reward from a mission. Karls was impressed, saying he was proud of him, especially for mastering such a useful skill so quickly, even as the third prince. Later, they went to the counter where the shield was being sold. The vendor said the price was 120 gold coins. Ergal protested, saying the price had just been 110 moments ago. When Gilroshan mentioned this, the vendor asked if it was their first time on the upper floor. She explained that up there, the prices of magical items fluctuated depending on various conditions. Gilroshan pretended to stay calm, but he knew that for newcomers on the upper floor, two things usually happen. Either they were tricked into paying far more than they should for an item, or they were lured into gambling and ended up losing everything, even their clothes. The vendor asked if he would make the purchase. Gilroshan knew he needed 3 important items from that place: a bow called Soft Piercer, a magical accessory known as the Forest Bracelet, and the Shield of Balance itself. Ergal couldn't buy the shield on his own since he only had 92 gold coins. Gilroshan had only 30 coins with him, so he also couldn't afford it alone. However, he knew that place was full of scams, so he thought he might be able to pull one off himself, without guilt. With that in mind, he asked the vendor if she sold the death dice. The woman was surprised by the question, but said yes, of course they sold it. In fact, she was just about to suggest it. She told him to turn at the third room on the second floor, where he could win a lot of money and come back to buy the shield. Gilroshan confidently said he would go there. He found it curious how all the vendors in that black market seemed extremely charming, clearly aiming to lure people into that den of traps. But at that moment, everyone started staring at him angrily. Sui, disappointed, said she had trusted him, followed him to Arax, but he had ended up there just to gamble. She said he was a prince and only knew how to drink and gamble, as always. She said he hadn't changed at all. Even Karl shook his head, showing disappointment. appointment. Gilroshan, confused, wondered if even Carl's was doubting him. To avoid a scene, he grabbed Sui's arms as she prepared to punch him and asked her to listen because he had a plan. Carl's agreed, saying it was best to hear him out first. When Gilroshan held Sui's shoulders, she went silent, visibly blushing with embarrassment. Gilroshan, irritated, thought she was filthy and shameless. Then he addressed everyone there and asked them to pay attention. He said that betting money always involved risk and uncertainty, but in his case, he was absolutely sure he would win. He admitted it was still a gamble, but different from the usual kind. Carl's noted it seemed more like an addiction, and that Gilroshan should seek therapy, since it was clearly a problem. But Gilroshan insisted it wasn't that. He said he was certain his method would work. He said he wasn't there just to gamble, just like he didn't fight Marquis Reit for nothing. He had a plan, and needed those magical items in the best way possible to prevent the catastrophe approaching Arax. He asked everyone to trust him. Carl's replied that with that level of confidence, he trusted him. Sui also said that, in the end, she didn't have much choice. Gilroshan then turned to Urgal and asked if he wanted his money back, or if he still wanted the shield. Urgal answered that he wanted the shield. With that decided, they all went together to the second floor. Later, Gilroshan was already winning every bet, and both Carl's and Sui were impressed by his performance. The woman he was betting against commented that the next round would be hers. She claimed to be lucky and skilled, and said it was rare for her to lose 2 rounds in a row. She admitted Gilroshan must be very lucky. In truth, she had a strategy. She deliberately lost the first 2 rounds to give her opponents confidence. Still, she found it strange how calm he remained. From his clothes, she could tell he wasn't from there, but she still couldn't decide if he was naive or just very intelligent. While pretending to be humble, Gilroshan said he was feeling lucky that day and suggested they raise the stakes. The woman said she would think about it. Inside, she was laughing. She thought he had taken the bait exactly as she had planned. To her, that was typical of gamblers. They all acted the same, but she couldn't show how excited she was. She thought he had walked right into the lion's den and that, no matter what he did, he would have no chance of winning in that hall. She intended to drain every last coin from him. Carl's, watching from afar, wondered what was wrong with that woman and why she had such a strange expression. Sui commented that maybe she was crying because she was very poor, showing some pity, but Gilroshan knew that woman was dangerous. If it were up to her, he'd already be broken naked. Still feeling bad for her, Sui said it might not be a good idea to raise the stakes, as the woman looked like she was getting too comfortable. Even Carl's remarked that she seemed to be crying. Gilroshan, however, knew they shouldn't fall for that trick. He told himself that in that place, anyone with a soft heart didn't just lose their money, but also their soul. The woman then apologized, saying she was just sneezing. She explained that the current bets were low, but she still had plenty of money. She told Gilroshan to bet as much as he wanted. He said that was great to hear and thought it was good to see her again. She didn't recognize him, but in the game, he always defeated her, and now he was about to do it once more. That was when the rules of the death dice were explained. This minigame was basically a board game. The players had to move across spaces until they reached the finish line. Movement was determined by rolling a die. It was like a magical version of the game of life. However, unlike normal games, this type of betting always took place where magical items were sold. Each space on the board contained some type of spell or trap, which made everything more unpredictable. The goal was simple: return to the exact space where the player started. The key detail was that players could also move backwards, which was a strategic mechanic. If a player wanted to stop another from reaching treasure, they could use reverse movement to hinder them or force a restart. However, all of this only worked if the dice cooperated, which almost never happened. This game was, in truth, the perfect trap for fooling first-time visitors to the black market. The die used there looked fair, but wasn't. There was a repeated pattern in the rolls: 6, 4, 4, 1, 5. It was a loaded die, rigged to always favor the opponent betting against the player. But Gilroshan knew that pattern. While pretending to be clueless during the first 2 rounds, he had already memorized everything. It was the same game he used to play, abandoned by the gods, and now he was ready to turn the tables. Gilroshan asked if, instead of betting money, they could bet magical items. Hiran, his opponent, replied with enthusiasm, saying it was a great idea. He then declared that he wanted 2 shields of balance. She laughed and asked if he wasn't being too arrogant by asking for 2 at once. Gilroshan calmly said he could also include a forest bracelet and a soft piercer bow. He believed that would be enough for his strategy. One of Hiran's subordinates whispered that, by the rules, only up to 3 magical items could be wagered. But Hiran paused for a moment and then whispered back. She said he didn't understand what was at stake. She was going to win no matter what, like she always did. Her job was to drain all the money from those fools. She ordered him to do his job and fetch the items the prince had requested. She also ordered that all exits be guarded in case he tried to run. She added that if anything went wrong because of him, she would turn him into a slave slave. The subordinate left with a fake smile on his face. Hiran then said her gentleman was going to get the items, but that before they started, she needed to know how much money they had left. She said it was just a standard procedure. Gilroshan asked Carls to show all the money. He then displayed the coins and asked if that was enough. Seeing the amount, Hiran nearly drooled. It was far more than she expected. She thought it would be easy to squeeze every last drop from him until he had nothing left. Gilroshan confirmed that the amount was enough and that they could begin. Later, the subordinates had brought the items Gilroshan demanded, and Hiran announced the start of the game. The prince said it was his turn to roll the die. He apologized, claiming it was his first time there, and then rolled the die while pretending to be inexperienced. But inside, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew Hiran's next roll would be a 2, and that after that, she would roll a 5, landing on the 50 gold reward space. He also knew that space was a disguised trap, meant to lure players and make them overconfident before losing everything. That was Hiran's strategy. She would let him win between 50 to 100 gold coins, only to flip the game immediately after, monopolizing all the rewards. It was a cycle of joy, followed by despair, and in the end, regret. That's what she fed on in that place. But Gilroshan wasn't like the others. He knew everything, every move, and he was ready to tear off her mask. On his next roll, he got a 6. He knew it should have landed on a 4, so that unexpected change caught Hiran off guard. She covered it up, saying the air inside felt dry. Gilroshan, playing along, agreed and pretended to feel the same discomfort. He noticed that the mistake with the die had shaken her control. Then, Hiran rolled a 3, returning to the expected pattern. That reassured Gilroshan. The 50 coin space was right in front of him. However, on the following roll, he landed on a 4, which was not the ideal number. If it had been a 1, he would have won 50 more coins. Still, he considered it good enough. He pretended to be disappointed, as if he had missed a great opportunity. He kept a frustrated expression to deceive Hiran, but inside, he was satisfied. He also noticed that Urgal looked very nervous watching the game. Hiran, trying to keep control, said he could come back on the board later and try again. When she rolled and got a 2, she landed exactly on the 50 coin space, just as Gilroshan had predicted. Hiran was shocked when she saw the result of the last roll. That wasn't supposed to happen. Gilroshan realized she must be very confused because the expected result was 5, but she had rolled a 2. Because of that, she landed on the 50 coin space, ruining the trap she had set. For Gilroshan, memorizing the die pattern was easy. The most important part was knowing how to manipulate it properly. The trick was simple. He just had to hold the die lightly and precisely before throwing it, allowing him to control the result. That's what he had done earlier when he rolled a 4 instead of the expected value. The pattern should have been 4, 5, 1, 4, 2, but he altered the sequence to throw her off. That technique was called a false roll, something well known among experienced players. Still, he wondered why Urgal didn't know about it, but he decided not to worry, because once he handed over the shield, Urgal would have to reveal his true identity. Hiran, trying to hide her frustration, congratulated Gilroshan on his win, saying he had earned his first balanced shield. Pretending to be surprised, he asked if he had really won. Sui, excited, said it was all about putting your heart into the dice. Urgal was very happy to have gotten his shield, which Gilroshan found a bit odd. Even so, he told him he could keep it. Reit, who was observing, congratulated everyone and asked if the game would continue. Gilroshan confirmed, saying he now felt lucky, as if the die was synced with him. However, he made it clear in his thoughts that he didn't intend to manipulate the die more than necessary. His goal was to appear like an ordinary, even foolish player, to keep Hiran uncertain. She, on the other hand, wasn't sure whether he was manipulating the die or not, and that state of doubt was perfect. After all, they were already past the middle of the board, and it was now too late to turn back. Gilroshan planned to take everything from her at that point. It was only a matter of time before Hiran revealed her true face. She said there were only 3 items left that he wanted. She said they would keep playing the same way. She also said that she had once felt as lucky as he did, and that at those times she always won. At that moment, it was explained that the death die contained 8 treasures in total. Hiran, who had gotten the first one, didn't expect Gilroshan to claim the second. She started to suspect something was wrong with her die. After all, if it was rigged, how could she have landed on the 50 coin space? That meant 6 treasures remained, 3 50 coin spaces and 3 spaces with the magical items Gilroshan wanted. He was determined. From that point on, he would take each of the treasures. He said sarcastically that it was curious how the die was magically landing exactly where he wanted. He also said it was quite fun. On his next turn, he landed on another 50 coin space. Hiran became even more confused. On the turn after that, he picked up another magical item. Hiran couldn't understand what was happening. Sui was thrilled, celebrating each each win, while the casino had just lost another balance shield. Gilroshan, pretending to be humble, said he even felt a little bad, but there was nothing he could do. After all, the die seemed to be possessed. Hiran, suspicious, asked why he was feeling bad. Gilroshan thought she was much calmer than he had expected. He realized then that she was truly a casino veteran. However, even keeping a calm appearance, she stared at the die nervously, trying to figure out what was going wrong. Gilroshan then asked if there was a problem with the die. Hiran, trying to stay in control, said no. She said she would just roll again. But Gilroshan knew she was in trouble now. Things were moving too fast, and she could no longer keep up. When he got another treasure, Hiran was visibly irritated. Soon after, he landed on yet another 50-coin space, and then picked up the final magical item. Everyone was celebrating, except for Hiran and her subordinates. She said, furious, that she couldn't lose that game. Out of control, she screamed, asking what that rolling with your heart nonsense meant, saying it was ridiculous. She claimed that if she lost, it would prove he was cheating. Gilroshan, keeping his composure, asked what she meant by cheating. She replied that he must be doing the same thing her die was doing. He then said he knew exactly what number would come next. He rolled, and as expected, it landed on 1. Hiran, terrified, asked if he had known the die's pattern all along. Gilroshan replied with irony, pretending to think, and said maybe, but he reminded everyone that they had all forgotten something. The die had been rigged from the start. He calmly thanked them for the magical items he had received. Hiran, overcome by frustration, asked if he really thought he had won fairly. She said he truly believed he could just walk out of there peacefully. She called him naive, saying the entire black market was already surrounded. She declared that she had won. She had made it clear from the beginning that there was no way she could lose. But Gilroshan, with a cold smile, replied that she was pathetic. He said that if she had at least lost with dignity, she could have left the scene quietly. And yes, he was well aware that they were waiting for him outside. The prince asked if Hiran really believed he had come all that way without being prepared. Hiran, suspicious, replied that he was a liar and that there was no way he could know everything that was going on. Even so, the prince noticed Thompson's tense expression and grew wary. He thought that if everything were truly fine, Thompson wouldn't have that look on his face. According to him, all it took was the signal and the door would open. Nothing would go wrong. However, Hiran insisted that he couldn't just walk out of that place. She demanded that everything stop and ordered her subordinates to attack. But Irgal, already prepared, activated his spirit sword and warned that anyone who tried to interfere with the escape would be killed. Hiran, frustrated, asked what they were waiting for, urging them to move against him. But the subordinates, worn out, turned against her. They said that if anyone was going to die there, it would be her. They were tired of following useless orders and had realized they stood no chance of winning. They declared that if she really wanted to stop the boy, she would have to do it herself. Gilroshan watched it all and concluded that Irgal had done an excellent job. He then asked if Thompson wasn't coming with them, if he really planned to leave him behind. Thompson seemed unsure, but Gilroshan assured him that everything was under control. He explained that Thompson was protected by a shield spell and that he could open the door safely himself. Carls also got ready, activating his own balance shield. Then Gilroshan announced that the plan would finally begin. As soon as the door opened, a group of armed men was already waiting. They recognized Thompson immediately and asked if he was the one behind the ambush. The local subordinates accused Thompson of trying to make quick money with the scheme and said he had always been pathetic, just like his two companions. They demanded that all the magical items be handed over and promised that no one would get hurt as long as they cooperated. They wanted to end everything right there. Hiran, still trying to maintain control, shouted that the boy had cheated and tried to escape. She ordered them not to let anyone get away. But at that moment, the prince gave the signal to Carls, who immediately activated his shield and charged forward, pushing everyone in his path, including Thompson. Since Thompson was protected by the spell, he wasn't hurt, and everyone else was thrown down the stairs, clearing the way for the escape. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. And if you want to support us even more, become a member. You'll get access to exclusive perks and help keep the channel going strong.